this morning. We've set ourselves this high bar. And I've just got a couple of announcements. So let me start by just noting the apologies for absence. Yep, you have them ready.
Chair, apologies for absence have been received from Assembly Member Bacon, Assembly Member Ashalomi, Assembly Member Gavran, Assembly Member Curtin, Assembly Member McCartney, Assembly Member Russell, Assembly Member Whittle, Assembly Member Twycross, and Assembly Member. That completes the list. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then announcement. I know the Mayor will join me in the thoughts that we have in terms of the sadness caused by the death of Ian Nunn, Chief Finance Officer for TfL. He passed away very suddenly on the evening of 24th July. We recognise the huge role Ian played in keeping transport in London working and improving despite major financial challenges facing TfL. Our thoughts and sympathy go to Ian's family and friends during this very difficult time for them. Mr. Mayor, just to draw your attention and to everybody's attention and to congratulate members of the brilliant work they've been doing. BBC Breakfast recently highlighted the work being done by members in responding to your transport strategy, and also highlighted the plight of bus drivers in London. And I know, as the son of a bus driver, this would have saddened you. And I'm sure bus drivers are looking to you to do something about that. And also thank members for the work that they've been doing recently. And there was an extraordinary meeting, extraordinary on so many levels, but mostly because we in this chamber heard the distress and the concerns raised by EU nationals when the EU Exit Working Group held a meeting here. That work is carrying on alongside all the other work that the Assembly does. So congratulations to all members for their work. Declaration of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Can I ask members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interest where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? None. Okay, minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary held on 28th June 2017, London Assembly meeting held on 6th July 2017, and the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 13th July. Yeah, thank you very much. And then item 4, the Mayor's report. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 30 June 2017 to 31st July 2017. And the Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report.
Chair, can I begin by thanking you for your very kind words about Ian Nunn. That will mean a lot to Transport for London and more importantly to Ian's family. I'm very grateful. Just before 7 a.m. this morning, there was an incident when a double-decker bus hit a building on Lavender Hill in Battersea. The Route 77 bus was travelling towards Waterloo when the crash happened. Police officers, the London Fire Brigade and London Ambulance Service all responded. The driver of the bus has been taken to hospital and passengers were treated at the scene. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say our thoughts go to everyone involved. I want to thank the emergency services for their swift response and can assure members that a full investigation is already underway. Today, I'm pleased to announce a package of measures to boost digital connectivity across our city and to tackle London's not spots. London is now a leading global tech hub with a thriving startup ecosystem alongside major companies like Facebook, Amazon and Google. Internet connectivity is a key public utility, and it's no surprise that some businesses see poor connectivity as a barrier to growth. If we're to remain competitive in the global economy, we need to ensure every Londoner can access a fast and reliable digital connection. That's why I've now appointed a troubleshooting task force at City Hall known as the Not Spot team. This team will be going out to London's most problematic areas to work with local authorities and providers to identify and deliver solutions to improve connectivity. At the same time, Transport for London is working to bring mobile connectivity to the London Underground network. The Elizabeth line will have mobile coverage when it launches through central London in December 2018. And I'll also be writing to all local authorities in the capital to encourage boroughs to bid for the government's digital infrastructure funding. And I'll also be hosting a connectivity summit, the Digital Connectivity Funding Forum at City Hall. Chair, at the beginning of August, I launched the London is Open for Summer campaign to encourage families to make the most of London's world-class treasures over the school holidays. I also launched the London Curriculum Family Explorer Trail to help families explore the city. London is one of the most diverse, thrilling and fascinating cities in the world. London's unique atmosphere really comes to life over the summer with the best festivals, sporting events, museums, attractions and lush green spaces around every corner. I've also been asked to give one oral update from a question from the Labour group about social media videos, which I'll deal with. Every death on the streets of London is an utter tragedy, and I'm deeply concerned about the rise in knife crime across the capital. Social media and the internet can be used to inflame tensions and escalate violence quicker than ever before. And while Google and YouTube have policies in place around violent content, they do not go far enough. They have a responsibility to the millions of young people using their sites every day, and it's vital that they toughen up their guidelines and remove breaches immediately. That's why I called this week for more to be done by social media giants to take down videos flagged by the police as inflammatory. I'm pleased that YouTube have been open to discussing the matter further and will continue to work with them to ensure that the internet is a place of safety, not a place which glorifies violence and promotes knife crime. As part of the development of my knife crime strategy, the issue of inflammatory videos which incite violence was raised as a concern by the police and the community and voluntary sector partners alike. This led to a commitment to work with social media organisations to ensure online videos which glorify knife crime are quickly taken down, including working with companies to put an end to profits made from advertising linked to their videos. In delivering this commitment, Met police officers flagged a number of videos with inflammatory content to YouTube which were considered by the site as not having violated their community guidelines, despite depicting gang members threatening and goading rival gangs, describing how they would murder them and waving around knives and samurai swords to a soundtrack of violent rap.
Thank you for that, Mayor. And that includes your response for an update on your tougher stance against videos encouraging knife crime, and that was requested by the Labour group. No questions? Okay, we'll just... yes, Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm excited about what you said about connectivity and clearing up the not spots, if you like, of connectivity in London. And I was particularly interested in what you said about access on the tube network. This group has been calling for a long time for there to be improved access. Since 1990, you've been able to get access on the Paris Metro, you've been able to get access on the Berlin Tube, and 2 months ago I was in the deepest metro in Europe, in Kiev in the Ukraine, and I had perfectly good service connecting with the outside world. Please hurry up and don't listen to excuses from TfL that they can't do it, it won't work on our system for this reason, that reason or the other. So if you could read our report, Calling All Stations, it's published on our website, and I urge you to take into account its recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions to the Mayor's update? No? Okay, thank you. Then let's go on to the questions to section 5. Questions to the Mayor. As set out in the priority order. Did you have something to say before the question?
Beg your pardon, sorry.
Sorry, okay. And the first question to you, Mr. Mayor, is the law and domestic violence offenders in the name of Assembly Member Duval.
Assembly Member Duval, let me begin by thanking you for your focus on this aspect of tackling violence against women and girls. A core commitment of the Police and Crime Plan was a refresh of the current violence against women and girls strategy. The Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, has already begun this work, and a new strategy will be published in November this year. We're keen to ensure that victims are both protected and supported, and view anything that reduces the burden on victims as positive. In refreshing the violence against women and girls strategy, we will be bringing together partners to discuss a number of topics, and we will raise your suggestion, Assembly Member Duval, for discussion at one of our consultation workshops. It is key for us that victims and survivors form the basis of this strategy development, and as such we'll ensure that your suggestion is also canvassed with our victim survivor consultation groups too. As well as considering new measures, we of course must also ensure we're making full use of the range of existing legislation. As I stated in my plan, perpetrators of violence against women and girls are, for a variety of complex reasons, not being effectively dealt with. We must develop effective interventions for perpetrators that minimise repeat patterns of abuse and ensure we have support for victims and their families. Domestic abuse, as you will be aware, is one of the most complex, disturbing and insidious types of offending. We know this has historically been an underreported crime for a whole range of reasons, and I'm clear that we must consider these statistics and their meaning very carefully. Those going through this awful experience often will find it difficult to report, often because of family ties. An increase in reporting could be a sign of increased confidence to report, which should mean more victims and survivors get access to help and support. However, it's vital we don't allow assumptions about increases in reporting to mask any actual increases in offending or severity of offending. In closing, I want to make this point. It is clear the Met Police Service is facing an unprecedented level of need for their services. Investigating domestic abuse and safeguarding survivors is a complex and intensive process, and it's essential that the Met has the resources it needs to do the best possible job. The government has to act now and start funding the Met properly for the vital work it has to do.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, in the way that you answered the question. This piece of research that I've issued today and why I've come to the conclusion about the register came out of an awful tragedy that occurred in a park in Lewisham, where the perpetrator of the crime, which was the murder of a 5-year-old boy, had been sentenced to a minimum of 18 years, but a life sentence. If you go back into his previous issues, there was previous issues in terms of domestic violence, was an attack of a 13-year-old boy punching and kicking him in the head as he tried to protect his mother from the attacker, knocked an ex-girlfriend unconscious as she refused to lend him a phone and her requiring surgery to fix her jaw, and he throttled a new partner when she told him that he could have only have a duplicate birth certificate of a son. There are numerous other violent crime aspects that this individual has been involved with, and it just seemed to me that that we're doing a lot in the Met. You're doing a lot. You've identified in the crime strategy, and your new domestic violence strategy in November will no doubt push that further. But there are gaps in these cases, and there's some inconsistencies, which I don't think we can blame authorities on, but I think as evidence emerges of why I come to the view about a register, it would be simpler to understand, easier for the police to use, but puts the onus on offenders. And I think whilst the government is considering further legislation for the courts, I think Clare's law has helped in terms of allowing family as well as potential victims to ask if they have suspicions of information from the police. We need something to track these men of violence. We need something to deal with the repeat offenders. Now, the police are carrying out an operation at the moment where they're tracking 400, but it's only an operation, and it would be interesting to see what arises out of that and lessons learned. Equally, there are a little known tools arising from the antisocial behaviour that I'd asked you to look at, which is the issue around criminal behaviour orders. Now, they're very complex, Mr Mayor, and they're bureaucratic. I think that's why the police don't use it, but they're in existing legislation. And if they were used on some of the most extreme cases, they may help the police in tracking until we can do it. It might be appropriate that you, in terms of the discussions you have, that you look in terms of either amending the legislation for that, of making them domestic violence friendly, in easing the pressure on the bureau paperwork that the police have to do it, because it would only enact once they've been through the criminal court process, but it would give a desired outcome as similar to the register for the interim until we had a register. If you could look into that, I'd be grateful, Mr Mayor.
Can I say, Chairman, can I just thank the work that Len's done in this area, but can I just reassure him that we are looking at how we can use the legislation we currently have. Senator Duval referred to the 400 of the most prolific offenders, the Dauntless Plus work being undertaken. Just to reassure Senator Duval about the use of criminal behaviour orders, he's right, they can be used to place restrictive measures upon offenders, and he'll be as pleased as I was to hear that this year a Dauntless Plus offender was issued with a CBO with the condition that he must inform the local police station of the details of any address at which he lives or resides for longer than 28 consecutive days and the name of any new partner within 14 days of commencing the relationship. But he's right to remind the police via me that actually sometimes the legislation is there, it's using it in a new way. And the good news is the CPS and the police are working closer together than ever before. But I'll take on board the comments he's made and make sure Sophie and the Commissioner are well aware of them, and we'll look at how we can feed this into our strategy.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry, New Council Homes for London.
Thank you, Chair. Getting councils building is a vital part of my strategy to tackle London's housing crisis. Alongside housing associations, developers, small builders and others, councils have a unique and I hope significant part to play in building new affordable homes for Londoners. Councils will play a crucial role if we are to fix London's housing crisis. In my conversations with them, it's clear many councils have ambitious plans to build more new council homes. And as they try to do so, there are several obstacles they have to face. First, councils need to find land to build on. And where this involves building on existing estates, it's essential that key principles around regeneration are followed. Second, councils can find it difficult to raise the finance required for major residential development and as a result of limits imposed by central government. And third, many councils have not yet built up the depth and range of expertise they need to take forward complex development projects. As boroughs face each of these challenges, I will do what I can to help them build more genuinely affordable homes. At the same time, I've been alongside them making the case to government for the extra resources and powers they need to go much further. On land, I'm working with councils to help unlock sites where, for instance, they need support to fund new infrastructure or require land. This has taken place both through our housing zone arrangements and through my team's work with boroughs to secure investment from government's Housing Infrastructure Fund. When councils' plans involve building on existing estates, I want to see them follow the principles I believe are essential when it comes to regeneration, which include giving residents a voice from the outset, ensuring no loss of social housing and committing to clear guarantees for tenants and leaseholders. On finance, I encourage councils to submit to the £3.15 billion affordable housing programme. On the question of capacity, I'm helping councils to build up their internal expertise through plans to share best practice and build capacity through collaboration. Alongside these measures, I'll announce further measures over the coming months to help councils build more genuinely affordable homes.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. You referred to your Affordable Housing Fund. You made an announcement in July about the first allocation of funding. Within that, just one housing association, L&Q, has been given nearly 3 times more grants than all the councils put together. L&Q got £394 million. All the councils together got £148 million. In total, councils are getting 8.7% of your funding. So, I mean, you've outlined some of the obstacles, but why is that number for councils so low if you're encouraging them to apply?
Because they haven't bid.
You didn't turn down any councils that bid for any money. That was all that applied.
So we've got a list of all the councils that are applied, and they're all reasonably happy because they got what they asked for, from City of London to Enfield, Harrow, Havering, Hounslow, Lambeth, Southwark and Wandsworth. The number of homes that in total is 2,677. There is still money left over. Of the £3.15 billion record investment we secured from the government, roughly speaking, half has still to be allocated, and I'd encourage councils across London to bid for the further sums of money, in addition to the money that we're providing councils and others to build genuinely affordable homes. We're also lobbying with councils, government, to lift the cap in relation to borrowing through HRA, but also improving rules around the right to buy receipts as well. But, you know, I work closely with councils, and I've had no complaints from councils about a lack of appetite from us to help them build genuinely affordable homes.
Okay, I mean, that's good, and I hope you succeed with the government. But even in the absence of government policy change, your grants are way more generous than those that came from Boris Johnson. I'd hope it would make more of a difference. I have two more specific questions about your grants, though, if I could carry on. First of all, are you continuing to award grants for homes that are simply replacements for those that are being demolished?
Well, I've not got a line-by-line allocation of each grant given, but the expectation is the grants add value. So where there's an estate regeneration, if, for example, to give you a general example, if for example, a council or a HA was regenerating an estate and they'd have to replace those social homes, there wouldn't be grants, there wouldn't be an expectation of paying grants for those. Where there's more council housing provided or HA housing provided, that's what the grant will go towards.
See, I'd hope you'd have a stronger policy on that than maybe only providing grants for the net gains. I think in the election we both agreed there needed to be less demolition on estates, and if you're giving grants, this works against proposals for refurbishment instead when you're comparing options. So in financial terms, it might tip the balance a bit more in favour of demolition options. Shouldn't you have a stronger policy against demolition when you're talking about the finance? I know you're putting one together for the guidance, but this is about financial incentives. Shouldn't you be stronger on that?
You used the word demolition, not me. I used the word regeneration. It's possible to regenerate an estate and not demolish homes. But what I'm talking about is new homes in London, new genuinely affordable homes in London. And the negotiation we have reached with the government is the £3.15 billion will be used to build 90,000 new genuinely affordable homes in London. And the money that we're going to help councils, HAs, developers and others is to build new genuinely affordable homes. And by the way, that means genuinely affordable, not 8% market value.
But does it mean new, though? That is the question. Are you giving, very specifically, are you giving grants to homes that replace ones that are being demolished? I asked about this in February. I had a written question in, and your officers took a long time to find this information, but it does turn out that your predecessor was giving grants, quite considerable numbers of grants, to homes that were simply replacements, and you can see how that would incentivise demolition when you're looking at options for an estate.
Sure. So the grants we're given are for new genuinely affordable homes in London.
And they're net new. If you're looking at an estate, you'd only give grants on the net gain.
Yeah, they're new.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll be monitoring that in future. Secondly, I wanted to check something on housing associations and rents. In response to another written question from me in June about rent rises between tenancies, you did say quite strongly, I will not authorise any further conversions of social rented homes to higher rents. So can you confirm that your grants to housing associations just announced that within those rents that do not go above social rent levels when re-let, that's now a firm condition of those grants?
So the genuinely affordable homes that we're giving the grant towards are one of three types. One is a social rent.
The social rent is what I'm asking about.
They've got to be the social rent. Second type is the London living rent, third of average earnings, and third is shared ownership. And so it's roughly a third in relation to the £3.15 billion. In relation to those properties that exist in social rent, if it's the case that either I'm involved in the planning position, via planning, as we normally do, or via allocation of grants, the expectation is, and the condition is, that it will be a social rent.
And they couldn't be converted, I think is the word,
no,
to higher rents?
Not using any of our money, no.
Okay, that's very good to know. Moving on to delivery, do you know that the number of new social housing homes under GLA funding programmes that have started on site during your first year of office is actually 0.
That's because you will know that planning takes some time from a plan being conceived to a plan being applied for. You've got 4 years from permission being granted to start building on a piece of land to it being completed. And so I'm afraid you're seeing the fruits of the legacy of the previous guy.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. It does mean that in future years, though, we're likely to see a year where completions potentially is 0. Do you know roughly when the first of your newly funded homes will start to be built?
So the deal we did with the government was deliberately homes started over the next 5 years for reasons the government recognised, because they recognise it's a marathon, not a sprint. So the deal we've got with the government is that we want to start to 90,000 homes by 2021. Obviously, that means working with councils and HAs and developers to get the land, to work with us on pre-application phase, to apply for permission, to get the permission, and then to get homes started. And so that takes some years. The average with a good wind is 2 years from inception to work starting. So we're trying to speed that up.
So does that mean that it's going to be 2 years before the newly announced funding starts to contribute to starts on site?
Well, no, the good news is some housing stations have already started work, and we've helped them fast-track stuff. I was able to, earlier on this year, hand over the first keys to the first London Living Rent properties because of a scheme that had begun, but we were able to convert that from a market value scheme to a London Living Rent scheme because of our grant allocation working with the HA. But I'm afraid the bad news is it will be a marathon, not a sprint. It will take some time before Londoners will see some of the benefits of this deal with the government.
Yeah, you've definitely got a lot of catching up to do during your first term, I think. During the budget meetings at the beginning of the year, you promised us a year-by-year delivery plan that we can use to check your progress. You said that would probably come when you did your first allocations. So where is this and when will it be published?
Happy to do so. I know Senator Boff has also raised this issue with me as well, and we expect to publish that soon. Obviously, we only announced the allocation 3 months ago. But we want to make sure there's transparency in relation to the progress made. And so we'll be giving a running commentary for the reasons alluded to in previous MQTs about progress made. And I'm not sure when the first one's going to be published, but I want them to be published swiftly.
Yeah, we do need the year-by-year delivery plan. Will it come with the housing strategy?
The housing strategy we published this autumn.
Yeah.
And so if it's possible, we will. We've got no reason not to publish it if we can. So the issue is we want to publish something useful. We only allocated the monies 3 months ago. We already have a good idea where that's going to go. If we can publish it, I'd be happy to, yeah.
Okay, and finally, when you launched your best practice guidance draft in December, you outlined plans
for estate regeneration.
There is the estate regeneration. You outlined plans to put local people at the heart of estate regeneration in the capital. On the 18th of July, you visited Kingston and the Cambridge Road estate, but you did not meet the residents affected by the regeneration plans, even though they were expecting to meet you until just a few days before. Instead, you visited by car with local council officers. Will you now arrange to meet those residents and talk to them about the alternative plans they have and their worries about demolition?
Well, look, I mean, these visits to local authorities are organised with councils and stuff, so I'm not going to criticise Kingston for the visit. I'm happy to arrange for Deputy Mayor of Housing, James Murray, to meet with residents who've got concerns about any issues and stuff, and we'll try and do that.
So James Murray will definitely meet with them?
I'm happy to speak to James Murray about trying to meet residents who've got particular issues around estate regeneration. You'll be aware the consultation that was undertaken around estate regeneration was very thorough, very robust, because we wanted to get it right.
That's not how the residents feel. They do have alternative plans they'd like to put to
I'm happy to compare previous mayors' best practice guides to mine. I'm happy to compare previous mayors' consultation with mine. It's the most robust consultation there has been in relation to a best practice guide because it's the first one. And we're keen to make it work, and I'll be publishing it soon. Frankly speaking, anything will be an improvement. We want to make a significant improvement in relation to estate regeneration involving residents, tenants and leaseholders when it comes to regenerating their estate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, well timed, Assembly Member Berry. The next question to you on the order paper, Mayor, is under the name of Assembly Member Curtin, who's not present.
Where's he then?
The deputy says he's holidaying in Europe,
he's
but
being
I
abused.
don't believe that for a moment. But the next question is yours, Assembly Member Boff, and that's just housing.
Thank you, Chair. Housing is an issue of huge concern to Londoners, and the scale of the housing crisis now threatens London's economic dynamism and its social mix. A generation of Londoners are now unable to afford their rent, are forced to live in overcrowded conditions, or see home ownership as an ever more distant dream. The consequences of the last Mayor's housing record are there for all to see. After years of falling under a Labour government and a Labour Mayor, rough sleeping doubled under the previous Mayor, with more than 8,000 people seen in London streets last year. The previous Mayor's rental standard for private renters was launched with a target of having 100,000 accredited landlords by 2016. In fact, fewer than 2,000 new landlords signed up. And when I took office, our audit showed just 13% of the new homes being given planning permission were affordable, with the number of affordable homes completed having hit the lowest since the records began. With this legacy to deal with, I've been clear with Londoners that turning things around will be a marathon, not a sprint. Since my election, I've been starting to make a difference. In November, I secured the largest affordable housing funding settlement from the government that City Hall has ever got, £3.15 billion to help start building 90,000 affordable homes by 2021. Last month, I announced I'd reach agreements with councils and housing associations to deliver 50,000 of these homes, a good start to the programme and nearly treble the 18,000 homes secured by the last Mayor in his final calls for bids. These homes will help meet the wide variety of needs that Londoners have. They include homes that are social rent levels, rents, shared ownership and My U London Live and Rent, where low and middle income households currently renting privately will pay no more than a third of average local income in rent, enabling them to save for a deposit to buy a home. Housing associations and councils who are part of my programme will deliver at least 50% affordable housing, and the major partners at least 60%, a key contribution towards my long-term target for 50% of all new homes to be affordable. Furthermore, I expect private developers to play more of a role in providing affordable housing, and so my new planning guidance sets out an easier route for them through the planning system if they include at least 35% affordable homes before any public grant has gone in. And this is backed by my new team in City Hall scrutinising their viability assessments. Beyond my main planning and investment roles as Mayor, I've also got involved in areas where I do not have direct powers, but I know are important to Londoners. On estate regeneration, the Good Practice Guide will be published shortly. Likewise, in the role of overseas investment in London's property market, we have commissioned the most thorough ever research into this matter, and I'll be publishing my response shortly. Additionally, Chair, we've raised standards in the private rental sector by we'll be publishing for the first time a database of landlords and letting agents who have acted unlawfully so they can't hide from prospective tenants. And on rough sleeping, we've boosted the £8.5 million a year we invest in the services with a new no-night sleeping rough task force. And as I said in answer to the previous question, I'll be publishing shortly my draft London Housing Strategy for consultation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How many starts of new homes have there been in your first year?
All homes, or generally affordable homes?
All homes.
I've got the... I've not got the figure in this briefing, I'm afraid, but I can write to you, give you the figure.
According to the DCLG, the figure is, to help you, 17,130.
Thank you.
From that same data set, we see that the final year of the previous Mayor, there were 21,310 starts. So a reduction of 20%. You said, Mr. Mayor, that it is a marathon, not a sprint. Is this marathon being run backwards?
Well, you'll be aware, as somebody who's previously chaired the Housing Committee, that starts are the end of a process. Well, actually, they're not even the end of a process. They're a process that take years to reach. You have the situation where you have the pre-application process, where application for permission for development goes in, where permission is granted, and you have 4 years from permission being granted to start a home being built. So I'm afraid for at least 2 or 3 years, if not longer, you'll be seeing the consequences of the previous Mayor's policies and permission being granted and all the rest of it. And I'm afraid you won't see some of the evidence of some of the changes we've brought in, significant changes for some time. You will see some changes in the short term. As I said in answer to the previous question, the first London Living Rent homes have moved into their homes. You'll see changes in relation to permissions being granted. There's been a trebling of affordable homes being given permission from those decisions that come to me. But I'm afraid you won't see a significant change for some time. That's why I use the phrase marathon, not a sprint.
You, in your manifesto, claimed that you will be building thousands more homes every year. Obviously, that's not the case, Mr. Mayor, is it?
Well, as I've just explained, it takes some time for homes to be built. The pipeline takes a number of years, and so the deal we reached with the government, you'll be aware, wasn't for us to start 90,000 homes in the first year, was to start 90,000 homes by 2021, because the government recognised that it takes some time for the house building pipeline to bear fruit.
So on reflection, Mr. Mayor, should your manifesto commitment have said we're going to be building thousands more homes every year after 2 or 3 years?
No, I mean, I'm quite clear we want to be building thousands more homes each year for successive years. I mean, actually, the housing crisis is a consequence of decades of failure, and it will take some time to turn it around.
Mr. Mayor, you haven't done that, have you?
Haven't done what?
You haven't built thousands more homes in your first year,
No.
and that surely must form part of every year.
Well, you'll be aware we're currently working on a new draft London plan. You'll be aware we're working on a new draft housing strategy. Any reasonable housing expert recognises it takes some time to turn things around, and I'm confident that as a consequence of the package we've secured, I'm confident as a result of the expertise we now have in City Hall, I'm confident of the working relationship we have with councils, HAs, developers, that Londoners will start seeing real difference to homes in London in the next few years.
Okay, that's good. You've actually got some numbers. I believe the government had to pay you in order to get some targets out of you, which I'm pleased about. But you had other commitments in your manifesto, one of which was to establish a London-wide lettings agency. How's that going?
Well, the good news is our lobbying of the government has led to them agreeing with me that they should ban letting agents from charging tenants fees. You'll be aware that the previous Conservative Party policy was against taking away the fees from letting agents. As a consequence of our lobbying, they've now agreed with Labour Party policy and my policy to stop that. That's meant actually, over the course of the next few years, once those changes come into being, tenants won't be ripped off by letting agents. We're working currently with local authorities to have a pan-London approach towards lettings across London. We've begun the process of working with local authorities about a landlord's database on naming and shaming, so good progress has been made.
So there's no London-wide lettings agency?
Well, as a consequence of our successful lobbying, the government's agreed with me to ban the letting agents' fees. One of the main reasons for a pan-London letting agencies is to stop tenants being ripped off. Well, the government's agreed with me, decided to ban letting agents' fees, and so the main reason for having one is now gone, and I think you should be thanking me and congratulating me for my effective lobbying of the Tory government.
What about your promise to give first dibs to Londoners on new homes? When are you going to deliver that?
I'll be publishing my response to the most detailed ever research done on overseas buyers shortly, and that will set out my response to the research we undertook. One of the findings of the research was in central London, up to a third of all new homes, a third, are bought by foreign investors. The good news is a significant number of those are then sublet to Londoners. Well, we're doing some work in relation to responding to that research. Already we've been successful with some local authorities in relation to planning conditions being given to developers, and so once you see my response to that, hopefully you'll be reassured that it's an issue that we're tackling.
Your response that this is a marathon rather than a sprint. What would you say to Londoners who rather want it to be more of a sprint? Because what you've actually told us is about how you're delaying delivering homes in London, and actually the demand is now. Sure.
I mean, if somebody's actually run a marathon, I wouldn't advise to sprint a marathon. I think the way you run a marathon is to pace yourself. But also, as somebody who's represented a constituency in London that's been at the receiving end of a Tory mayor for the last 8 years. I frankly won't take advice or lectures
You do
from a
understand,
Tory
Mr.
Assembly
Mayor, I'm
member.
asking you about
What I will
what
say-
you want to do,
what-
not
what I will
I
say-
spent a lot of time
What-
asking the previous guy about his performance,
What-
and it wasn't always complimentary for me, to be honest.
What-
So I'm asking you about your record.
What-
You know, it's very tiresome for you to just constantly say the previous guy. It doesn't move the world forward. Does it?
Assemblymember Boss, can we stay with questions? Let's.
Well,
What's your latest question?
Chair, I'm asking about
Yes.
the mayor's record, not his predecessor.
Okay.
And yet he continually talks about his predecessor or something other than his record.
To be fair, Chairman, I think it's important to learn from others about the mistakes they've made to avoid the elephant traps that they fell into. And I think it's really important to learn those lessons, Chair. I'm really sorry that Senator Voff doesn't think it's wise to learn the lessons of mistakes
I just
made
think,
by
Mr. Mayor,
others. I'm quite clear, though, Chairman, I've been clear throughout the last 15 months and also during my campaign that it'll be a marathon, not a sprint. And I've also actually said successive governments, and by successive governments I include Labour governments, haven't done enough to address the housing crisis in London. It will take some time to turn this around, and I think it's really important to make Londoners aware of that. I can't promise overnight success.
You'll be receiving a report soon, Mr. Mayor, from the Housing Committee, rapporteurship compiled by Nicky Gavron about modular housing. And the reason that we're doing that is because we actually think you do have to have elements of a sprint rather than just a marathon in housing. And I hope you read that document very assiduously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is in the name of Assemblymember Copley. Government's... Oh, no, sorry, Assemblymember Devonish. Yes, come in. Sorry. So,
After you now have working on your housing team, please.
I'll share the information. We've actually brought TfL together working with us as well now, so there's quite a significant uplift from previously. I know Tories are let me talk about the previous guy, but it's more than the previous guy had.
Could you write to me with an org chart, please? That would be helpful. Across the Assembly, we've also asked in the past that you have at least one individual responsible to getting SMEs building in London. Have you now got somebody accountable to make sure SMEs, rather than just the same old large developers and housing associations, are developing with you?
Yeah, in answer to a question that I've been asked later on, I'll be talking about the work we're doing around small sites, and one of that is to get not just small sites working with SMEs, but also to make sure we involve small builders as well, and I'm happy to wait for that answer or write to you if you prefer.
Thank you.
okay, anyone else? No, okay. Let's move on to the next question then. Assemblymember Copley's question. Government's transport investment strategy.
Not at the moment, no. I welcome the proposal to create an English major road network, which will mean that local authorities are given a share of vehicle exercise duty. However, the way it's structured at the moment does not work for London, and the Transport Commission has been making the case for change with officials. Londoners pay around £500 million a year to central government through vehicle excise duty, yet a significant proportion of this is spent almost exclusively outside of London. At the same time, there is a net operating deficit for London's roads of around £500 million a year. This means public transport users will increasingly be subsidising the cost of operating the TfL road network. This is clearly an illogical and unfair position. Following the removal of TfL's operational grant from central government in 2018-19, this is also completely unsustainable. And the position is unique to London. As an example, the stretch of the A2 from Dover to the GLA boundary is maintained by Highways England and is supported by funding from central government. However, as soon as it crosses the GLA boundary and responsibility passes to TfL, government funding stops. Londoners rightly expect the taxes they pay to maintain their services. A fair share of vehicle excise duty they pay should be used to fund London's major roads. This would remove the need for public transport fare payers to cross-subsidise roads and allow TfL to continue investing to deliver the policies in my draft transport strategy. My Transport Commissioner Mike Brown and his team have met officials at the DfT and Treasury on a number of occasions to discuss this issue, and I'll continue to make the case to ministers. I'd welcome your and the Assembly's continued support to tackle this discrepancy.
Thank you very much for the answer, Mr. Mayor. I mean, we often hear, don't we, from other parts of the country that London receives too great a share of transport funding, and that perhaps we shouldn't get some of these big transport projects. But actually, there is a great unfairness there in that I think almost all of that £500 million that are paid by London drivers is spent outside of London, despite the fact that 90% of Londoners car journeys take place exclusively on London's roads. And I'm pleased that you are making representations to the government about this. And in fact, Mike Brown highlighted this very issue, the example that you gave at Transport Committee. The London Finance Commission recommends the hypothecation of a share of London's contribution to vehicle excise duty for improvements of nationally strategic roads within London. Do you agree with this recommendation? I mean, I take it from your answer that you do. What are you doing to convince the government of the arguments?
So I do agree with the LFC's recommendation. I've met the Chancellor myself and raised this issue, and the impression I get, and one mustn't give a running commentary about conversations and negotiations with the government, but in general terms, I think they recognise we've got a strong case in relation to, particularly with the operating grant being reduced to zero in 1819, for us to get a bigger slice of the pie. And actually, they also recognise that actually it's in nobody's interest for roads in London to be badly maintained. It's in nobody's interest for there to be problems in relation to roads in London, particularly major roads. And I think Treasury have started to move, and I'm looking forward to the Transport Commissioner's team having fruitful discussions with Treasury, because it's not sustainable.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Devonish, Notting Hill Carnival.
Thank you, Chair. Notting Hill Carnival is one of the most important events on London's cultural calendar. This year's event takes on an added importance and poignancy for the community following the tragedy at Grenfell Tower. Of course, it is the Notting Hill Carnival Enterprises Trust who organise the carnival, not City Hall. But we have a shared ambition to ensure it takes place successfully and safely. Following specific concerns raised after the 2016 carnival about levels of crowding and the potential risks to attendees, the Notting Hill Strategic Partners Group commissioned an independent report by Movement Strategies into crowd dynamics at Carnival to understand crowding risks and what could be done to ensure a safer future Carnival. The Strategic Partners Group, consisting of London Notting Hill Carnival Enterprises Trust, MOPAC, GLA, the Royal Borough of K&C, Westminster City Council, the Met, TfL, London Ambulance Service and the Arts Council have collectively endorsed the recommendations of the crowding report and are now working together to implement them for this year's event. Headline changes agreed by the organisers include a reduction in the number of sound systems, fewer and smaller vehicles on the carnival route, and an earlier start and finish time for the procession. I've also allocated £290,000 to support stewarding at Carnival, and for the first time, London Notting Hill Carnival Enterprises Trust have appointed an event management company to manage this year's event. I've discussed Carnival with the Met Police Commissioner. We should make no mistake, as one of the biggest street parties in Europe, the Carnival weekend makes for one of the most challenging days in the policing calendar. The Met continue to review their policing plan to ensure public safety. Met activity in the lead up to and during Carnival will take into account lessons learned from the recent appalling terror attacks in London and overseas. For reasons you'll understand, Chair, I'm unable to go into detail here on counter-terror activity, but I understand the Police and Crime Committee have been given a separate briefing on this. I recently received representations from the Minister for London, Greg Hands, asking me to consider relocating the Carnival away from Grenfell Tower. It is my belief that Notting Hill Carnival should stay where it is. The Carnival was born out of the African Caribbean immigrant community in North Kent and Notting Hill in the 1950s. It remains incredibly important to this community, and I have no intention of moving it elsewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Will you be attending Carnival yourself this year?
Yes.
Great. Look forward to seeing you there. In terms of training the stewards, 1,400 stewards the GLA are paying for, can you tell me a little bit about the training that's been taking place, please? Stewarding was used last year as well, you'll be aware. It's the trust that appoints the stewards, and so it's a decision for them to take about which stewards they appoint, and I'm sure they've looked into the training of the various stewarding companies, and so it's a question really for the trust rather than me. Could I ask that you take that up, because it was mentioned at an open scrutiny meeting this week at the Royal Borough that the training, there wasn't that much training time built in for the stewards, and all the people, officers of all the disciplines were a bit concerned about that.
Are there particular concerns around?
Just lack of training for any new stewards, basically. Will they have enough time for the budget, basically, was the concern.
Chair, can I go away and look into that and then right back to because obviously Tony's the representative of the area, so it's important that he's reassured. Can I right back to you on that?
Thank you. And who is ultimately legally responsible for the carnival, please?
So, I mean, I don't want to sort of, it's really important that we work collegially with the various stakeholders. I mean, it's organised, as I said, by the London Notting Hill Carnival Enterprises Trust. They organise the carnival, but it's not, what I don't want is an issue of you know, buck passing. We want to work closely with them, as do the police, as do the GLAS, to the two boroughs, and they do, London Ambulance Service, the Arts Council and stuff. And so it's a team effort, but obviously it's not us that organises it, it's the Carnival Enterprises Trust.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I'm always been impressed by how everybody works together. But it was quite clear at the meeting this week, as it's been clear every year, that it's not always quite clear where the dividing lines are between the Met, the two local authorities, the ambulance service, TfL, etc., etc. And we've drawn these huge charts, officers have drawn these huge charts. It's rather complicated. So you mentioned the Minister's points, which you rightly made your point on. You're entitled to your view, sir. But in terms of the other point that Mr. Hans made about one person, one organisation, namely potentially you, being responsible for the whole carnival, so there's direct, clear accountability. That's the point the Minister was making. He wasn't trying to make a party political point. He was just trying to say whether the Mayor is you or the previous Mayor, Mr. Johnson, or a future Mayor, accountability should be clear.
Sure, but you'll be aware, the last thing anybody should be doing is taking over community events, whether it's Pride in London or whether it's other events that take place in London. Nobody's suggesting, for example, I take over football matches. And the Carnival has got a rich history of being organised by the local community. But the point I think you're getting to is the Carnival is the victim of its success. It's just got bigger and bigger, and so they need assistance. And I agree with you, it's not a part political point that Greg was making in relation to that. But I don't think it's appropriate for somebody from outside the community to take over the Carnival. What I think it's appropriate to do is for us to help those who organise the Carnival for it to be safe and successful. And that's the offer we've made, and the resources we've given to Carnival organisers is more than given before. But it is a big policing operation. It is a big source of concern. Criminals go to Carnival. You know, Carnival doesn't create criminals. And we've got to recognise that. It's a big event. Too many people go. It's not surprising that opportunists, criminals want to go to Carnival. But also we've got to recognise, because it's so successful, there are crowding concerns the police have got. What we don't want is, God forbid, a Hillsborough type situation, or terrorists thinking it's an opportunity for them to cause damage. So we've got to provide professional advice for obvious reasons.
Okay, but you are reassured that Carnival will be safe for the community this year, particularly on the crowd-crushing element that the report was focused on, please?
I'm seeing the Commissioner again today, and that's one of the issues I'll be discussing with her. We keep things under review. There is a goal group that's been set up. The organisers have taken on board the specialist report prepared by the experts after last year. The Police and Crime Committee from the City Hall have discussed some of the issues around concerns around counter-terror. You'll be aware last year's Carnival took place after Nice, and so the organisers were very responsible about making changes, which we appreciate. Further changes taking place this year for safety reasons, and we'll keep it under review. The evidence I have so far is I'm assured about safety. I'm reassured about safety. Obviously, it's a number of weeks until Carnival. We'll keep it under review, and you'll also be aware, as I alluded to in my answer, the organisers have been very sensible about making some other changes this year from previous years, and that's to be welcomed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, and thanks to Assemblymember Devonish for bringing this question, and Mayor, thank you for reminding us of the history associated with the Carnival that started in 1958 with Caribbeans reclaiming the streets, because in the face of the terror that they were experiencing then. And of course the mother of Carnival, Claudia Jones.
Absolutely right.
So thank you for that, and I hope everybody has an enjoyable, safe and happy Carnival, jumping up and whining as they do. I won't be there, sadly. Let's go on the next question from Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. The awful and devastating fire at Grenfell Tower has understandably left many people, including those living in such blocks, asking questions about high-rise residential buildings. I know you've been there for obvious reasons, your connection to the community and your family and friends who still live nearby. Some of these questions will need to be explored by the public inquiry and the much-needed review of building regulations that I and others have been calling for. I'm pleased the government have finally announced that there will be a review of the building regulations. Councils, housing associations and government's initial focus has rightly been on identifying high-rise blocks with cladding similar to Grenfell's and sending samples for flammability testing. My officers were part of the team coordinating this work, and I wrote to the Prime Minister to emphasise the need to ensure that the independent expert advisory panel appointed by the government provides crystal clear advice to housing providers on the steps they need to take to make buildings safe. It's essential to make sure all high-rise blocks are made safe for their residents. Where buildings can't be made safe through improvements such as retrofitting sprinklers, or where other improvements cannot be made without compromising the building safety, it could well be that some blocks may need to be demolished and replaced, but clearly this should be a last resort. I'm calling on the government to fund any financial gap that arises from retrofit requirements. I don't, I'm afraid, have powers over building regulations, but I have asked my team to investigate what can be done through the planning system to improve fire safety, and anything I can do through planning that I will. I want to be clear, though, that I'm not per se against tall buildings or new tall buildings in London. They can be designed and built to be safe. They can make a positive contribution to a neighbourhood, and we need them if we're to cope with the growing population. But they're not the only way to provide the housing and employment space we need. Greater densities can be achieved through a range of building designs, including courtyard blocks and mid-rise buildings. What is possible and appropriate will depend on specifics of the site, and my New London plan will deal with some of these issues.
Thank you for your answer, Mayor. I appreciate that. Can you give us any idea of how your London plan will look at it? Because one of the issues was about access, curb heights, road widths, those kind of things. And we understand that modern planning should make the building safer, two exits, etc., etc. But is there anything you can do specifically with the London plan? Has your team looked at that?
Well, Sean, you've been there a number of times. You'll have heard from residents their concern, for example, about access to the tower block. Mm-hmm. Some of the things raised with me, just anecdotally, is, for example, because of other buildings built around the tower block, did that deny fire brigades, fire engines access to the tower block? So that would be one of the things we look at in relation to access to a tall building. Other things we could also look into is in relation to can you have lifts inside a building that are fireproof, which is really important to look into that. We're looking into all sorts of issues. You'll be aware a number of years ago, a requirement was put in place for all new buildings to have sprinklers. But we're trying to be as innovative as we can in relation to looking at what other cities around the world do to make sure our requirements are as tough as they can be. That's on top of building regulations review the government's undertaking. So I'm not simply relying upon the building regs review. I'm saying, can we use planning to make sure our buildings are as safe as possible? And that includes, by the way, retrofits. Can we look at improving planning around retrofits as well?
Okay, thank you for that. Do you agree that councils and housing associations should publish regular fire safety assessments of their tower blocks, and indeed any building that might be difficult to escape from? I used to live in a block near Grenfell. It wasn't a tower block, it was a what we call low-rise block, but I used to worry that getting out of there in a hurry would be an issue.
I think we should have as much transparency as possible. Just so others are aware, I know you are, but in addition to planning and building regs, there are separate fire safety regulations, and the London Fire Brigade do a great job. I think maximum transparency is really, really important, if for no other reason but to give public confidence, but also for tenants to be aware of how safe a building is. But also that puts small p pressure on a council and a HA to make sure they raise their game as well. There's nothing better than pressure bottom up to people in positions of power and influence, so I welcome that.
But will you use your planning powers to send that signal, to create that pressure? You can change things through your own powers to send that message. Will you be doing that?
So we can't force them to, but we can make sure we explain to councils and HAs that our expectation is there to be maximum transparency, and we'll be doing that.
Okay. I just want to quickly move on to resilience. The London Authority, GLA, is a big part of London's resilience. Are you conducting any audit, any look into the GLA's response to the disaster at Grenfell?
So one of the things I've done is ask the chair of the public inquiry for us to be a core participant in the public inquiry, because I've got a number of issues that I want to bring to his attention about how local authorities deal with such crises like the one we saw at Grenfell Tower. I think this was a national disaster. I think no council in the country could have by themselves have responded by themselves to the national disaster. There are issues about mutual aid, about if the council doesn't ask for mutual aid, whether steps can be taken. I'm not suggesting that, I'm not being flippant, a coup where I take over the reign of a council. But there must be better ways of doing things, and so that's one of the things I'll be looking into, is how we can improve things in the future, because I'm afraid the bad news is there's likely to be another sort of tragedy may not be a fire incident, but another incident in another part of London. And what I don't want to do is be frustrated by not being able to get involved and help.
But my specific request is for the GLA, your office, to look into anything that we, the GLA, could have done better. Because I accept your point that a disaster is imminent in such a big city. There's always something that can happen. So the GLA needs to look at its own response. Are we doing something specific about that?
We are. We're reviewing we always have a debrief and review how we responded to an incident. Not just this one, it could be a terror incident, it could be another incident, if there are lessons to be learned. And we're looking into what lessons we can learn. But obviously you'll appreciate there are more lessons we may learn from the public inquiry as well. So of course we are. So by the way, at the London Fire Brigade. So by the way, at the other police service, because they're involved in Grenfell Tower, as indeed we are too.
Well, could we ask for those details or the conclusions of that report
Happy
to
to.
be made
Very happy
public? And the last thing I'd say is it possible for the GLA, maybe with London councils, to practice for a disaster? That one of the reasons the fire service responds so quickly is because they have the practice. It's very different actually going through the process than just making the notes and assuming that it will happen on the day. Is that at all possible?
Just to reassure, that does happen. I mean, London councils do lots of planning and preparation around this area. They have a resilience team. You'll be aware that the chief executive of City of London is the person who's involved in the work the task force are doing. That's because of the planning and preparation that takes place. I'm afraid it relies upon a council asking for help. And there are separate discussions about what happens when a council is slow off the ground asking for help. 3 days is a long time. For example, when there was an issue with Camden a few weeks later, where Camden were worried about the safety of their buildings, Camden asked for help straight away. So that's an issue for London councils. We work closely with London councils, and I'm happy to feed in any particular issues that you have. But that resilience and preparation does take place already.
Please do, because Camden's response was based on the learning from Kent and Chelsea's response. And if the Mayor of London, if your office can suggest to councils, you should take this as an opportunity to learn, to practice, to name the officers who were responsible in an event of something of this nature and this scale, a horrific scale, happening. Unless we actually go through the process beforehand, it will always be slower at that point of crisis.
Chair, with your permission, I'm very happy to get from London councils a briefing note of actually what their resilient plans are. And if there's any, and I will circulate that. If there are additional points Assembly members want to raise with London Council, I'm happy to facilitate that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Let's then go. Sorry, Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, what research, will you write to me or publish the academic evidence and research that supports the view that residential tower blocks are okay from the perspective of educational outcomes, health outcomes and crime outcomes?
Sure.
I think
not sure
the
I'm not
member
sure-
said
I'm not-
commissioned or right to him.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss with Senator Boff offline exactly what he wants, then write to him once I know exactly what he wants.
There's growing evidence that tower blocks are not the place to bring up families. However, in your period, you've overruled 2 local councils in terms of building residential tower blocks. I'm not saying this is down to you. Your predecessor did exactly the same thing. This is not a party point. It's a view as to whether or not tower blocks are the kind of places that people think is the best place to bring up families, bearing in mind the evidence that is around that says they are precisely not the places to bring up families. So what I'm asking from you, Mr Mayor, is either to commission evidence, write to me possibly with the evidence that is being used to inform, for example, the London plan about tower blocks, but also consider the possibility of commissioning research to show whether or not that's the kind of buildings Londoners actually want to live in.
I'm really glad that Senator Boff said the last bit. What I'm happy to do is write to you with our thinking at the moment around tall buildings in relation to the draft London plan. Our thinking, then if we can have a discussion about how you think that may be failing, then we can because obviously we're at the right stage to do it now, because the draft London plan will be published later on this year. Yes. So now's the best time to have that conversation. So why don't I write to him with the thinking that's going behind our current policy around the draft London plan that we can have a discussion about.
That'd be great. Thank
Is
you.
that
Yeah, that'd be great. And we could also ask Assembly Member Boff to share that with other members, of course.
Absolutely.
Because other members of the Housing
Of
Committee.
course, of course. Well,
and
of course.
we're all on this issue. Okay, thank you for that. Let's then go to Assembly Member Pigeon, Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf cycling.
Thank you for your question.
pedestrian bridge.
The Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf crossing will provide a much-needed new walking and cycling connection between the two key opportunity areas of the Isle of Dogs and Canada Water. The new crossing is in my draft transport strategy and the TfL business plan. TfL has established a project team to take forward the crossing and over the past year has progressed at pace on developing options, surveys, demand modelling, procurement, business case development, funding, planning consents, land requirements and engagement with stakeholders. TfL has appointed Arcadis, a renowned engineering and design consultancy with international experience in delivering pedestrian and cycle crossings to develop designs and ensure that the scheme is cost effective. For example, how high should it be or what type of bridge should it be? During June and July 2017, TfL held a series of workshops with the local communities and user groups in Southwark and Tower Hamlets to listen to their views on what the crossing should look like and where it should land on each side of the river. TfL anticipates that a public procurement process for a design and build partner will start in the autumn. This procurement will make sure the recommendations and lessons from previous procurements and Dame Margaret Hodges' report into the Garden Bridge are followed. I'm hoping that the consultation on the preferred option takes place in early 2018 before detailed plans are drawn up to allow an application for the necessary consents to be made in due course.
Lovely, thank you very much. And as you know, I've been a strong supporter of this cycling and pedestrian bridge in part of the Thames that's really difficult to cross by bike or foot. But I just want to get a bit more clarity today from you about the schedule and the funding for this vital project. When will the funding strategy for the scheme be published?
So in TfL's business plan, there's already funding to support the new crosswork. We're also keen, though, to consider options from third-party contributions.
Yeah, I accept, you know, there are going to be some issues to be resolved, but can you clarify you would expect landowners such as Canary Wharf Group on one side and British Land on the other to contribute towards this new crossing?
Well, let's not get into who's going to contribute what, but we want third parties to contribute towards this year.
So landowners generally, you would hope would contribute towards this sort of infrastructure?
I'd hope so.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And when do you think the bridge will finally be built and open to the public?
Well, one of the things that I'm hoping those who will bid for the contract, to design and build the bridge will have noted is my comments on when it's done as soon as possible. You'll be aware from previous conversations we had about, 2020, 2021 being what we want to do, and that's the sort of timescales we're talking about. But obviously, if somebody who bids for this plan, design and build procurement process is able to do it sooner, then obviously it could well be that their application will be considered more favourably than somebody will take longer.
So you're still looking at 2020, 2021. Well, that's great news because I know people in this area desperately want this crossing to be built. In terms of, you said that you've got, in the autumn, you're going to be starting the procurement. Have you looked at all options? Because there's one thing, you can have the open design type competition, as we know, from the infamous Garden Bridge. But a possible quicker way could be TfL buying and adapting an existing design, and that potentially could be cheaper and quicker to deliver. So have you looked at all the options before you go ahead with procurement in the autumn?
I think TfL have. One of the things that TfL have recognised is that things move very quickly. So there is, for example, there is a design out there,
Yes.
which is a number of years old now. And so one of the reasons why they're keen to have the procurement process is because there may be innovations around the world that could lead to something being done, cheaper, quicker, and of higher quality.
Okay, and obviously, quite right, we have to make sure we don't make the mistakes that the previous mayor made on designing and giving contracts to bridges and so on. But my final question relates to how we can make the most of this bridge. And I'm really pleased to see that the cycle hire scheme is going to be extended to Brixton this year. However, it really makes sense the cycle hire scheme is also extended out to Rotherhithe, and all the benefits really of the bridge would be magnified if the cycle hire scheme was in that area. So are you looking at this actively, and will you ensure that TfL pushes Southwark Council to do the thing that many other boroughs have done, putting money in and supporting cycle hire extension?
So TfL are, as you know, continuing to explore suitable funding options, which include the Rotherhithe Peninsula Urban Development work taking place and the Rotherhithe Canary Wharf Bridge programme, and speaking to councils on both sides of the river too. And we're keen to make progress around further extensions of the cycle hire scheme. As you said, Brixton's a great result, and we're trying to make sure we can have more cycle hire schemes across London.
Yeah, I mean, I accept you can't roll out cycle hire to the whole of London, but this is a really obvious gap that would almost finish the sort of circle of inner London. And if you're going to have this fantastic crossing, it would make sense for cycle hire. So is that something you're committed to try to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, TfL are currently exploring, as we speak, funded options to extend the Stanton Hill cycle scheme. And I've mentioned to the people that two of the potential funding streams, we're keen to extend it to suitable places, particularly where there's funding available.
And does that include Rotherhithe and picking up this Rotherhithe-Bermondsey sort of anomaly where there's no cycle hire?
That includes that part of London as well, yeah.
I welcome that, and I really hope you can push Southwark Council as well to look at where they can put funding in, as many other boroughs in London have, to secure the cycle hire scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. And go on to Assemblymember Cooper's question on Crossrail 2.
I want to start by thanking you and the Assembly for the continued cross-party support for Crossrail 2. To ensure Crossrail 2 can carry passengers by 2033, it's vital that the hybrid bill is submitted in this Parliament, as you know. Any delays to this will see the scheme's costs go up by up to around £2 billion a year, so it's essential that we get a timely decision from the Government. 2033 is a crucial date because it's when Phase 2 of HS2, High Speed 2, will start bringing tens of thousands more passengers into Euston every day, and Crossrail 2 will be needed to support their onward journeys. By this time, TfL's modelling also predicts huge increases in crowding on the Underground and on the South West main line into Waterloo. Without Crossrail 2, the South East will grind to a halt. TfL submitted a business case to the Transport Secretary in March, and I've had a positive discussion with him since. Chris Grayling has expressed his support for the scheme, and as we set out in a joint statement in July, we agreed to work together to make it more affordable, with London funding 50% of the cost during construction. The recent general election has meant the timetable has been moved back slightly. The new plan is now to submit a hybrid bill in early 2020, receiving royal assent in 2022. This does not affect when Crossrail 2 would start running services. It will allow construction to begin in 2023 and the first passengers to use the service by 2033.
Well, thank you very much for that update, Mr Mayor. It's answered one of my queries, because obviously I knew that TfL had put in the revised business case, had gone in on time in March, but with the intervening general election, that things have been pushed back. And I think everybody in South West London welcomed the fact that you and Chris Grayling had made the statement in July, and that we'd finally heard that there was going to be support from the Secretary of State for Transport, which is extremely welcome. Obviously, there was then concern that we might not hit the hybrid bill timetable, and you just said that it's now moved back slightly. I just want to find out from you if you now feel that that timetable is definitely something that we're going to be able to stick with, because obviously while you're saying the end date and finishing and completion in 2033 won't be affected by a slight slip in the hybrid bill, I think if there's any further slip, then that could potentially start to be difficult. So is that definitely firm? Yeah,
and DFT understand our concerns, which is obviously the uncertainty causes problems with planning blight. I'm well aware of the issues around Tooting Broadway. And so the sooner that DFT and TfL can agree and provide some certainty, there can be the draft route going out for consultation as well. I had a very good meeting with Chris Grayling. He understands the benefits to the country with Crossrail 2 happening, but also why it's crucial for future jobs, future homes, and for the future of London, bearing in mind the population is rising. I'm optimistic. The meeting we had was very constructive, and we've agreed to do further work in relation to half the cost during construction. It's going to be a challenge, but we recognise that actually with the government being committed to a number of projects around the country, HS2 and a number of other projects, we've got to, in real time, try and find those that contribution. And by the way, to those colleagues around the country, I gently make a couple of points. Firstly, the country needs Crossrail 2, but secondly, we're contributing half the cost during construction, which is more than any other region or city is doing on any transport project across the country. So that's why there's progress been made, and I'm optimistic.
Well, I want to just ask you about that in a moment, but just before that, can I just ask, because obviously it's businesses and local people in Tooting, in Balham, Clapham Junction and around Wimbledon who are all constantly asking me about when will the next consultation documents come out. Is that still going to be running to the same timetable, even if the parliamentary timetable has slipped slightly?
The DFT and TfL are keen to get out the new proposed route sooner rather than later.
I think that would be very welcome because, as you say, it does lead to blight for local businesses. Moving on particularly, but obviously local residents have that fear as well. Moving on to what you were saying about the 50% funding, obviously that will be quite unprecedented that we're going to be front funding right from the beginning in that way, and I very much take your point about the rest of the country should bear that in mind. What funding mechanisms are we specifically looking at to enable us to be able to make that upfront contribution in that way?
Well, you'll be aware that actually we will be paying for Crossrail 1 for a number of years after it opens, and the way we've managed to contribute a third of Crossrail 1 is a combination of SIL payments and business rate supplement. We'll still need some of that going forward, and so we can't use all of that for Crossrail 2. We're speaking with businesses across London about plans they may have in relation to the funding of Crossrail 2, but also one of the things the Treasury has been keen to work with us on is the issue of land value capture. We talked about that in relation to good progress made with the Chancellor in relation to the Bakerloo Line extension. But, the DFT have given us a challenge, pay for half the cost during construction. I think demonstration of our can-do attitude is we're taking up the challenge given to us by DFT and trying to find ways to find half the cost of the Crossrail 2 during construction. We were confident of being able to repay the government in the 2030s for Crossrail 2, but because the government's keen for us to pay for it during construction, I'm not criticising the government, I'm just saying that's just fact of life. We're trying to find ways to make the sums add up. That may mean the full Crossrail 2 not being built in one go, but we're keen to make sure we can meet the objectives of DFT, which is to have half the cost of construction paid, which is important for us to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and obviously we're keen to support the rest of the country being developed at the same time. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member O'Connell, acid attacks.
Thank you for your question. There has been a rise in acid attacks in London and other parts of the country over the past year. The victims of these attacks can be left with terrible injuries and require a great deal of ongoing support, whether that be medical or emotional. Of course, I completely condemn those who are willing to commit these acts and want to reinforce the message that where life-changing injuries occur, there needs to be a life-changing deterrent, and I'm calling again on the government to review sentencing on such attacks. In terms of the immediate response, the police are in the process of rolling out acid kits in 1,000 police cars across London. They'll include large bottles of water, gauntlets and goggles. When incidents such as this are reported, the London Fire Brigade will also be alerted and will attend the scene as they will be able to access large amounts of water quickly. The MPS are also outlining a 3-step model to inform people what to do in the event of an attack. Remove yourself from the situation, remove any clothing stained by the corrosive substance, and remove the substance itself with water. The Met will be utilised in existing operations at street level to combat the carrying of such substances through increased awareness amongst officers. And to ensure safe procedure, there is a pilot in East London using litmus tests, as those officers have additional training already. I'm aware acid is being used in attempts to steal mopeds as well. The police have operations designed to tackle this. To address the problem in the longer term, I've taken steps to ensure the government's alerted to this problem and takes action to prevent further incidents. I've pressed them to introduce tougher sentences for those who carry acid and corrosive substances, and asked that sentencing guidelines be clarified for judges so those found guilty of committing acid attacks get the punishment they deserve. It is also important to clamp down on the sale of corrosive substances and provide additional support for victims who have been physically and sometimes mentally affected by these attacks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, of course, we welcome the extra acid kits. But I think your last point is an important one, which is about the prevention and the sale of acids and similar substances, which has been picked up by the government, but we all know that government and changing of laws can take time. So specifically around the sale of acids and similar substances. Have you, out of this building, been able to contact or speak to retailers or give some sort of direction through your mayoralty, in essence preempting any later legislative changes?
So, you see, you're right to remind me about the legislative change in relation to industrial acids. So this is the change, not just the deregulation the government did in 2015, but the whole issue of industrial sale of acid. But you're right, actually, household detergents can be used in acid attacks, stuff we use to unblock drains and around the house. So some councils already have pilot projects. Hackney are working with retailers locally around sale of acid and making sure the public are aware. The key point is this, though, that we've got to make sure that just like something that's lawful, like a knife, can be used as a weapon, so can acid. And we've got to make sure that the public are aware. If, for example, a member of your family is thinking about taking out acid from the home, that's prevented. And so what I'm saying to the public is your intelligence is invaluable in relation to letting us know if you know of somebody carrying acid, please report it. Or if somebody in your family is thinking about putting acid in a bottle to take out to keep themselves safe, there's a duty upon you to make sure you act upon that.
I mean, you have quite rightly led initiatives on other aspects of serious crime, knife crime, domestic abuse. And with this rise, it's a phenomenal rise in acid attacks, disproportionately so in London, and also, as you pointed out, conflation with the rise in moped attacks. We are seeing a new phenomenon of assaults on Londoners. And I would urge you really that I think this is something that this building probably needs to get perhaps more of a leadership grip on, with an expectation that you, Mr. Mayor, could perhaps do some initiatives around this from your mayoralty, as opposed to waiting for the legislature, because I think it's important that I think you, because it's very much a London phenomenon, that potentially you take a lead on it, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I'm taking a lead on it, but it's not. But to be fair, it's not just a London phenomenon. I mean, I've got the figures for around the country.
Yeah,
There's been a rise around the country. But a number of things we can and we should do in relation to the voluntary sale of acids around London. I talked about the initiative in Hackney. We've got to make sure there's an awareness around retailers not to sell to underage people. We've got to make sure parents are aware of this. There's an education programme we're working on in relation to that. Sentencing is an issue I've alluded to already, but also changing the law. For example, it's an offence to carry an offensive weapon. Question, did the police recognise that actually these acids are an offensive weapon? And so we've got to make sure we tackle that as well. And you're right to remind others about the link that I've talked about between moped crime and the increased use of acid.
And you mentioned earlier also, lastly for me, around knife crime, and you'll know that only 2 nights ago in Croydon we lost a young 15-year-old man, Shemaine Gupal, to knife crime. And clearly this is an issue in London. The Home Secretary and the Commissioner came out in support, again, of appropriate information-led stop and search. Would you agree with them and support appropriate stop and search in this very difficult time in London?
I fully support the Home Secretary and the Commissioner, what they said over the last few days about the use of stop and search. It's got to be intelligence-led. We're not talking about industrial scale or indiscriminate use. I want to reassure Londoners that what the Commissioner and Home Secretary were talking about is the police using this invaluable tool they have. And just to reassure Londoners, the game changer is the body-worn video.
Indeed.
Biggest rollout of body-worn videos anywhere in the world. That should reassure the police as well. I want the police to be confident using this valuable tool when it comes to stop and search. And I really welcome the comments for the Commissioner this week. The Commissioner talked about it being done with courtesy, because the public are the biggest allies that we've got in fighting crime. What you don't want to do is inadvertently put members of the public off reporting crime because they've been treated badly by the police. The police get it. I want them to be more confident. I want Londoners to recognise that good use of intelligence-led stop and search is a good tool in the armoury of the police to keep us all safe.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Okay, thank you. And Assembly Member Dismore, additional funding for fire service.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank on behalf of all Londoners, everyone who works for the London Fire Brigade, for the hard work they do day in, day out. They are a credit to the fire service. Assembly members will know that I wrote to the Home Secretary on the 12th of July expressing concerns about the resourcing of the London Fire Brigade following the tragedy at Grenfell Tower. In the letter I explained that following the Grenfell Tower fire, I asked Danny Cotton, the London Fire Commissioner, to review the specialist equipment and support the London Fire Brigade requires to support future rescue and recovery exercises. Her initial assessment indicated the LFB needs £6 million in new specialist equipment and an additional £6 million a year to operate and maintain the equipment. LFIPA's Resource Committee recently endorsed that assessment. I've had this week an initial response from the Home Secretary, which I regret to say is not encouraging and stresses that this is a matter for the GLA to manage within its existing funding arrangements. We will consider the response from the Home Sec over the coming days, but it's worth remembering the context that informed my initial letter. The GLA's spending power is falling significantly in 2017-2018, and London's fire funding from government has been cut repeatedly over the past 7 years. Meanwhile, we must also make further savings to balance the budget position inherited from the previous mayor. So if additional resources are not forthcoming from government, we shall face very serious difficulties in maintaining and improving the fire brigade's essential work protecting London and Londoners. I reiterate that keeping Londoners safe is my first duty, and I have a responsibility to ensure our courageous firefighters have the kit they need. I've therefore requested arrangements are put in place now to procure the items that the Commissioner has asked for. This will mean, initially at least, drawing on reserves, which of course can only be used once, and it leaves the ongoing annual costs unfunded in future years. Under the previous mayor, the 5th London Safety Plan closed 10 fire stations, removed 14 fire appliances, and cut over 500 firefighter posts. So while we continue to search out efficiencies, the Fire Commissioner has said plainly that savings of this scale cannot be achieved without significant reductions in and reconfigurations to frontline response, say nothing of the wider important work the brigade does day in, day out to protect Londoners.
Thank you, and it's rather disappointing that the Home Secretary has responded in the way you've just indicated, because as part of an initial assessment post-Grenfell fire, the Fire Commissioner identified the shortfall, which is not just £6 million, that actually represents 3 extended height aerial ladders, which we know are desperately needed, 2 drones, 1,200 extra extended duration breathing apparatus sets and other specialised kit, as well as restoring Boris Johnson's previous cut of 27 fire safety inspection officers. And it's quite right, you've told the Commissioner to get on with the procurement, as most of this equipment takes time to come through. You can't buy it off the over the counter. But how can we afford all this if the government doesn't help?
Well, I think there's going to be serious problems in the future about balancing the books for the London Fire Brigade. Let me be clear, though. We have a situation where firefighters are risking their personal safety and their lives to keep Londoners safe. It's unacceptable for them not to have the equipment that they tell me they need. And that's why I've authorised the expenditure of this money to procure the equipment. We're spending our reserves. You can only spend the reserves once. Unless the government recognises the resources that London Fire Brigade needs, I worry about the future funding of the London Fire Service. What we can't afford to do is have cuts on the scale that the previous mayor did. It's not sustainable.
Well, depending on the outcome of the current pay negotiations, the brigade could face a budget gap of £25.5 million by 2021-2022, which is of the same magnitude as those cuts forced through by Boris Johnson, which you mentioned earlier on, and which were opposed by LFIPA at the time. He issued a direction to require us to make those cuts, and actually that led to me resigning from the chair of the Resources Committee. If the brigade has to make cuts of this magnitude, which I don't think can be contemplated, what risks to Londoners do you see as a result of all that?
Well, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. What I do know is that the government simply doesn't understand the financial position of the GLA or the London Fire Brigade. The Home Secretary, I'm disappointed to say, was advised using figures that were a miscalculation and not understanding how the reserve situation works. I'll give you one example of the challenge that London Fire Brigade faces in relation to reserves. There's currently, roughly speaking, £37 million worth of reserves in the London Fire Brigade. 16 million of that is earmarked for specific projects. They're advised to have a 3.5% contingency. That's, roughly speaking, £14 million. So they're only left with £7 million. And for the Home Secretary to think you can buy the equipment we need that the Fire Commissioner has advised for that sum of money just shows a lack of understanding. And I'm hoping that when I get a chance to explain this to the Home Secretary, she will recognise the need why we need additional resources to keep our city safe.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Desai, challenges to policing.
Thank you for your question. First and foremost, let me be clear that London remains one of the safest global cities in the world, in no small part thanks to the dedication, skill and professionalism of the men and women of the Met Police Service. But I've been open and upfront with Londoners and with the government. Policing in our city is under real pressure, having to work with decreasing resources to deal with the level of demand increasing in both volume and complexity, and of course in recent months facing the dreadful terror attacks and the investigation into the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the increase in acid attacks and moped crime that we've talked about shortly. The MPS is required to make a further £400 million worth of savings by 2021 on top of the £600 million already cut. If these are all carried out, they're going to result in police station closures, front counter closures and possibly even reduction in frontline officers, although this is something I will work flat out to avoid. That's why I continue to call on the government to fund the Met properly through the police grant and through the national and international capital city grant. Whilst there is ongoing uncertainty from the government, the Met must continue to plan. So against this complex backdrop, the Met is transforming itself to meet the needs of Londoners. The Met is testing plans to merge borough commands into fewer, larger basic command units, and this is part of the transformation. This new model has been tested in 2 areas of London, as you're aware. We will learn from these Pathfinder sites, and the Met will fully evaluate how they are working. The Commissioner and I will together consider the evidence from the Pathfinders and the views of stakeholders towards the end of 2017 before determining the manner of any further rollout across London.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I make no apologies for making this point, and I've done this repeatedly at Mayor's question time about the lack of proper funding for London's police. Last month, the Assistant Commissioner wrote to retired police officers asking them to consider returning to police service. What does this say about the state of policing in London today?
Well, look, I mean, I supported the decision to write to retired officers because the experience they have is invaluable potentially to us as a police service. And I think it demonstrates the challenges we have. Look, the crime issues in London are complex. We're a global city. We need the specialism and expertise. We're recruiting new officers. What we haven't done is stop recruiting. But at some stage, we may need to stop recruiting unless there's significant resources input from the government. Things are really, really tough.
Well, on that point, again, last month, the Minister of State for Policing and Fire Services, Nick Hurd, wrote in the Times that, and I quote, police leaders are giving us a consistent message about being stretched, and we are listening. Well, I'm glad that he's listening, but don't you think it's about time that the government started acting?
Well, can I tell you why it's not good enough for us to wait for an announcement in the autumn budget about additional resources, should that be forthcoming? It takes months to train police officers, and we're now looking at a situation where because it takes so long to train police officers, we could well reach next year, unless the government gives us reassurance urgently, a position where the number of police officers in London for the first time since 2003 falls below 30,000. And that's the scale of the challenge we're facing because of the resources being lost to London over the last 7-8 years, and as currently planned, over the next 4 or 5 years too.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When you do speak to the Home Secretary about the fire service, can you obviously make the same case for the,
Absolutely,
which I know you're doing anyway.
Absolutely.
For the police service. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Pigeon.
Quickly, Mr. Mayor, in terms of challenges to policing, following the awful case of the grooming gang in Newcastle on the news yesterday, will you be asking for a review of the Met's resources in their child abuse teams?
Well, we're asking for an increase in resources overall. You'll be aware of the HMIC report last year, which the Home Secretary is well aware of and has raised it with me, of course. That's one of the reasons why, when I talk about complexity of policing in London, that's one of the things I refer to.
But are you asking to review that particular area given this high-profile case elsewhere?
Well, we're asking for an increase in resources overall, and the issue around women and girls and how we make sure they're safe is a big issue in my police and crime plan, so it's part and parcel of the police and crime plan and the need for additional resources.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Holter, immigration skills charge for the
Thank you for your
NHS.
question. This is an important question, and you may be aware that I've spoken about this issue before. At the start, it's important to say this is not a choice, and you're not suggesting this, between investing in the skills of Londoners or recruiting from outside the UK. Migration benefits London, and it's part of the capital success. It helps make London the world's leading city for business, research and innovation, and it leads to an economy that creates jobs, many of which will be high-skilled and opportunities for Londoners too. Frankly speaking, I don't think that London's NHS and social care system can afford this change. I'm told that the overall purpose of the immigration skills charge is to address skills gaps. I understand the logic, and of course I'm also keen to see that Londoners have the skills Londoners' employers need. However, I believe introducing this measure now will just put yet further pressure on the health and care services, which are simultaneously being told they need to absorb significant cost increases to help manage an already extremely challenging financial position. Moreover, this measure would make more sense if there was a surplus of people in this country to work in these roles. But there aren't. It takes years to train doctors and nurses, and workforce planning in the health system has not been robust in recent years. It's also important not to lose sight of the wider context, the value of migration to London. Last month I hosted a migration summit which brought together business and public sector representatives, including the NHS, along with policy experts. There was a clear consensus. London needs to remain open to skills and talent. This drives innovation, jobs and growth, which creates more opportunities for Londoners. And my position is that this should be based around the UK's continued membership of the single market and a reformed visa system for non-EU nationals.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that answer. Of course, you know that the BMA and the Royal College of Nursing have asked for this to be exempt, for the health service to be exempted from this. But of course, there's a triple tragedy that's operating here. One is that we don't have enough UK-trained citizens who are working in the health and social care sector. Secondly, the Brexit is causing a huge exodus of personnel from the health service. And of course, in the Evening Standard this week only, there was headlines saying the exodus of staff caused by Brexit could cause cripple of the NHS. And the head of the Royal College of Nursing warned about this. So we have a triple whammy operating, that we aren't training enough people to work in this country, it's costing us more to employ people from non-EC countries, and people from the EC are leaving the UK because of the threat of Brexit. And this doesn't make sense at all. So what can we do, right, or what are you doing to bring pressure on the government to bear on this in this respect?
Well, there's a fourth issue. You referred to three big issues. The fourth issue is, at a time when money's tight, to expect the public sector hospital trust to pay £1,000 a pop doesn't make sense. And it's a disincentive when they can't afford to do so. And it's a big issue. And I think, the Secretary of State for Health has got to get a grip, because there is a skills shortage. If you're a young Londoner thinking about a career in health and social care, and you look at the way professionals have been treated in the recent past, you may ask the question, do I really want to do that? And that's why I'm saying I'm not detracting from the need for us to train up our youngsters to do these jobs in the future, and you're not suggesting that either. What I'm saying is, when there is a staff shortage, when there is a situation where people are choosing to leave this country because of Brexit and other reasons, it doesn't make sense for there to be this fee around the Tier 2 visa applications. And so, that's why your question is so important. And it's important for the government to recognise that of course, we want to train up our youngsters, and that, but this is not the way to address the current problems in the health and social care system.
Yeah, I'm not agreeing entirely that the problem isn't just about training enough people in this country, it's also about retaining them, right?
Absolutely right.
Is that we need to encourage UK citizens to go into the healthcare sector, but then of course it should be attractive for them to do so and to remain in the health service.
And the context is, I'm told in London, the nursing vacancy rate is 15%.
Yes.
So it's not as if there are people, big surplus of skilled people. Where there's a vacancy rate that's very, very high, and that's why it's important for the government to recognise that this policy is not going to do London's NHS any good.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that.
Good. Thank you. Let's go to Assembly Member Prince, Nightshue.
Thank you for your question. Protecting the interests of London's residents, workers and visitors is vital when developing London as a 24-hour city. 1 in 8 jobs in the capital are at night. This is set to grow in the coming years. Night tube services are already playing a key role in opening up London's nighttime economy, with the network estimated to provide a boost of £77 million a year and support around 2,000 permanent jobs. However, a balance must be struck between work, play and sleep. for London's 8.8 million residents. TfL has a dedicated team of specialists to investigate and respond to noise complaints. This has improved its ability to identify hotspots and target interventions. This is particularly so in summer months when windows are often left open during the course of a hot night. TfL is dealing with the source of the noise, such as the trains and the tracks they run on directly. This is a more effective long-term investment than other measures such as triple glazing. There is no single solution to resolving track noise, but the installation of over 10,000 shock-absorbent track fixings, for example, has had a positive impact in a number of hotspots, including some of the east end of the Central Line. Elsewhere, TfL has identified a number of opportunities to proactively reduce noise levels, such as at Wanstead, Woodford and Bethnal Green stations. At Wanstead, TfL is installing resilient track fastening, a rail damping system, and will be remeasuring noise levels to determine the benefit. At Woodford, TfL is trailing Quiet Rail, an innovative compound applied to the web of the rail that hardens and should act as a damper. At Bethnal Green, TfL has re-railed the track and awaits follow-up readings to assess any reductions in noise. TfL and my Deputy Mayor for Transport, Val Shawcross, acknowledge the issues remain, which is why we continue to look for other solutions. TfL is trialling new technology to help reduce noise in open sections of track, and it has a programme of rail grinding and other track work to make sure that rails are kept smooth and as quiet as possible across the network. We'll continue to do all we can for TfL to be a good neighbour while delivering the world-class levels of service day and night that are needed to enable the growth of the city.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't think that anyone can really criticise TfL for not trying, because I've had a number of meetings with them, with residents, and believe you me, they have tried. But I do have to ask the question, do you feel, Mr Mayor, it is acceptable for residents to suffer noise from the tube at night time in excess of 50 decibels?
It's not acceptable for anybody to be deprived their sleep for factors that they're not responsible for that can be ameliorated. That's one of the reasons why TfL is using the best experts and the best technology to reduce noise. And actually, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, Val Shawcross, is at this MQTs to hear your concerns, because she's keen to make sure that TfL is a good neighbour.
Are you aware, Mr Mayor, that they have tried those technologies? The grinding does have some effect, does work. But they've tried the Quiet Rail and the other technologies, and they have remeasured, and they had no effect whatsoever, Mr Mayor. Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware that they had no effect. The information that I've given is that they're going to remeasure and see the difference it's made. I know from other lines across London that the changes brought in has addressed some of the concerns raised by residents of noise.
In some respects, you're correct, Mr Mayor. And again, do you know that the measures they've taken to reduce vibrations, for instance, have been very effective? So that's where they have been effective. But the noise reduction on the surface trains, Mr Mayor, have not been effective, and they have tried everything, and it was Duncan Weir, who's the Head of Operations, Upgrades and Asset Development, London Underground, so it flows off the tongue, that title, says that there is no more in a technological way that they can do. They have tried everything. They will continue to search around the world for new technologies, but everything they have tried has failed, Mr Mayor. So my question to you is, do you not think it is now time to be the good neighbour that I know you want to be, and TfL want to be, and to accept that there is no technological solution at this moment in time, and for you, Mr Mayor, to pay for those worst affected residents to have triple glazing fitted?
Well, that's not information that I have, Chair, but I'm happy to go away and look into the information that I have, and happy to arrange for the Deputy Mayor for Transport to meet with the Assembly member to discuss what more can be done. The information that I have is we're waiting to have the remeasuring undertaken to see if any improvements have been made. But I'm happy to discuss this with my Deputy Mayor for Transport and with the Assembly member to address the concerns that he's got, because, as I said, you know, the idea of not being able to sleep on a Friday night and a Saturday night because of the night tube is not one that I'm happy with.
Okay. So I can assure you that the remeasurements were done, but I think it's only right and proper you should check that for yourself, Mr Mayor. But the question must be, therefore, if you are satisfied that those remeasurements are not working and people are still having to live with in excess of the 40 decibel, which is the World Health Organisation recommendation. Will you give a commitment, Mr Mayor, that you will at least look at triple glazing these people's homes?
Well, I'll give you a simple example why triple glazing is not the panacea. In summer months, people have their windows open. And so we've got to address the issue, which is at the root of the problem, which is having trains that are less noisy. And that's why what I'm happy to do is for my Deputy Mayor to meet with you and discuss the particular solutions that we may have around this. But we shouldn't pretend, I'm not suggesting that you're doing this in a malevolent way, that triple glazing is a panacea, because obviously, particularly in summer months, it's not.
Yeah. No, I accept that, and Mr Mayor, you're quite correct. If a solution could be found trackside, that would be preferable, but it's been admitted that there isn't one at the moment. But your offer, if I can just get clarification, Mr Mayor, is your offer that I can meet with the Deputy Mayor and some of the residents? Is that your offer, or are you offering to meet with them yourself? Of course we can organise that. Of course, it's only right and proper that your residents should be there as well. I'm happy to do that. So your offer is that I meet with the Deputy Mayor, not with yourself?
I'm happy to meet with you as well, but she's on top of this more than I am. So I get my information from officers and my Deputy Mayor, but I'm happy to meet with you. It may take
with residents, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, of course. It may take longer, but I'm happy to do it. Of course I am.
Well, I really appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. It's very kind.
Thank you, Assemblymember Prince, for bringing this up. Can I just intervene here and just say this is a London-wide issue, I absolutely support the moves that Assemblymember Prince is making on his behalf. But I would ask that there is an understanding that any moves to say maybe offer triple, glazing to one lot of residents would mean that you would have to take a pan-London approach to that. Well, I say no more, but my constituents would not expect me to say anything less.
For the avoidance of doubt, Chair,
and yours.
No such offer has been made.
I'm just saying this is a matter, it's a pan-London critical issue about loss of sleep. It was so important the Environment Committee has actually done some work on this. So I would, through you, Mayor, just ask your deputy to actually see this as a pan-London issue, dealing with the Assembly member, of course, but that we look at this in a very strategic way.
It's very important.
Thank you. Assembly member Shaw, your question on the future of the LLDC.
The LLDC is undertaking a huge amount of work to deliver homes, jobs, a successful park, and with the 4 local boroughs is leading the successful regeneration of one of the poorest parts of London. The significant successes already achieved are a testimony to the leadership and contribution of all involved. It is essential that this progress is sustained and indeed taken further for the benefit of current and future residents of East London, as well as those visiting or working in the area. It's our joint responsibility to ensure that this happens. I'm clear that LLDC, as a mayoral development corporation, has a time-limited role, which should not be unnecessarily prolonged. But equally, we should not rush to remove powers prematurely when there is still work that can be best done by a single body, such as the Development Corporation. There are, of course, issues we have inherited from the previous mayoralty that we need to address, for example, working to put the stadium on a sustainable financial footing. We need to identify both the best model to succeed, LLDC, and decide when and how the transition should occur. It's important for me that we work closely with the 4 local boroughs as we identify and evaluate the options available. Following consultation with the London Assembly, as required by law, I've now formally appointed Sir Peter Hendy as LLDC Chair. I intend that he will work on plans to secure the long-term future of Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, collaborating with my Chief of Staff, David Bellamy, my Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills, Jules Pipe, the leaders of the local authorities, Hackney, Newham, Tower Hamlets and Waltham Forest, and other relevant stakeholders, such as the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority. We will ensure that the Assembly is updated as these plans and timelines take shape.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you have an exit strategy for LLDC, given that obviously the local boroughs want to start looking ahead in terms of their planning powers, etc., which I'll come to in a minute. But certainly I think it is time that you start looking at an exit strategy. Do you have one?
We do, and that's one of the things that Sir Peter Hendy will be looking into. I think, to give you a frank answer, the exit wouldn't happen in mayoral term 1. I'd be disappointed by the end of mayoral term 2 if there was still a development corporation at LLDC, but it's contingent on some of the challenges we face around the viability of the stadium, around some of the applications coming forward. But I think those are the timescales we're talking about.
Mr. Mayor, are you sympathetic to the view that the LLDC's planning powers could be handed back ahead of planned period of 2030 to the boroughs to complement and further progress the agreed social and economic convergence agenda?
Well, look, I mean, one of the things that obviously councillors have a big role to play is when it comes to plan applications, because they know their communities far better than officials, board members who don't live in the borough. There are some strategic issues about doing that in relation to whether some projects could be viable in relation to the financial costs of supporting them. So I think what we'd want to do is exit with the DC being got rid of and all the powers being given to local authorities, rather than cherry picking, if you like, some of those powers being given back to local authorities. But I'm sympathetic to the 4 London authorities, the 4 local boroughs wanting, planning powers sooner rather than later. And one of the key things Sir Peter will be doing is working on a plan to move away from the DC to eventually LLDC going, and the 4 London boroughs taking over everything from planning to all the other issues around regeneration as well.
Could planning be one of the priorities to bring it forward, to hand it back to the local authorities concerned?
I'm not keen at this stage, unless the Chair advises me otherwise, to have bits and pieces given back at different times. What I'm keen to do is have the Development Corporation got rid of and for all those powers to be given to the local boroughs rather than one at a time.
There are concerns about costing of the cultural and education sector. Can you update us on the funding progress of Foundation for Future London?
We've had really good conversations with education and cultural partners around the culture and education district. We're hoping to make an announcement in the next few weeks in relation to the progress we've made, and I'm hoping that you'll be as pleased as I am with the progress we've made there.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, Assembly Member Cooper, tube noise.
Appropriate question, bearing in mind the comments of the Chair in answer to a previous question. Over 7.6 million journeys have been made on the night tube since I first launched the service last August. I remain committed to making sure that the night tube works for local communities as well as customers, and that noise from our services is reduced to the lowest level possible. TfL has a dedicated team of specialists to investigate and respond to every noise complaint. This has improved its ability to identify hotspots and target interventions. TfL is dealing with the source of the noise, such as the trains and the tracks they run on directly. There is no single solution to resolving track noise, but the installation of over 10,000 shock-absorbent track fixings, for example, has had a positive impact in a number of noise hotspots. TfL and the Deputy Mayor for Transport acknowledge that issues remain, which is why TfL continues to look for other solutions. TfL is also trialling new technology to help reduce noise in open sections of track, and it has a programme of rail grinding and other track work to make sure that rails are kept smooth and as quiet as possible across the network. Since you raised reducing train speeds as a possible solution with my Deputy Mayor for Transport, Val has discussed it with the Managing Director of London Underground, Mark Wilde, and Mark Wilde is now investigating if it would be possible to reduce train speeds on any of the night tube lines, as they do not all operate on the same technology. I've asked that TfL keep you informed of any progress. I know you and other Assembly colleagues have been in contact with TfL about night tube noise, and this scrutiny has provided valuable feedback for TfL. I'm assured there is a robust procedure in place so that TfL can respond quickly and sympathetically to all reports of noise disturbances. TfL will continue to do all it can to be a good neighbour while delivering the world-class levels of service day and night that are needed to enable the growth of our city.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we too are very glad to see the introduction of the night tube and the focus on keeping London open, vibrant and growing. But obviously there are individuals in these hotspot areas who've been having these problems, and a number of them approached me. So I, as the chair of the Environment Committee, and then with the support of all colleagues, invited them in to talk to us. And actually some of the testimony that we heard this March was actually quite difficult to listen to. Some people who are really having trouble generally, but also because of the night tube. And it's quite clear that it is clustered. If you look at the number of complaints about the Northern Line, it's 100. and the Victoria line is 85, and yet the Jubilee line, which is a much newer line, it's only 15 on their records. And actually some people are writing to me almost every day. So that's why I thought I'd raise this, and obviously you've heard already from Assemblymember Prince and Assemblymember Arnold, and I know that Assemblymember Dismal has a number of his constituents who are impacted both by the Victoria and the Northern, two of the worst lines. So I thought it was worth trying to find out whether slowing down, and discuss that with Deputy Mayor Shawcross to see if that was a possibility. I'm aware that on the river, to deal with the houseboat enclaves, that TfL and the Port of London Authority have come up with passage plans with Thames clippers. So even if we can't slow down whole lines, the clippers slow down near the houseboats. So slowing down perhaps in some of the hotspot areas to complement all the other work that's going on, the grinding, the shock absorbers, the track fastenings and lots of technology I'd never previously heard of. Would that be an option that Mark Wilde and his team could look at as well?
Absolutely. Can I just say, as a consequence of your representations to the Deputy Mayor for Transport and then her representations to the Managing Director, these are being explored. Nothing is being ruled out in relation to trying to reduce the noise. We are keen to reduce the noise at source for obvious reasons, and I've seen the figures for where the complaints are coming from, which lines and which particular stations that are near them. And I've read some of the testimonies of, I think, 6 of the residents gave evidence to your committee, which, you know, I don't want a situation where people can't sleep because of the night shift, which is why we're trying to address these issues as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's about the targeting to the areas where we know that there's a change in direction of the line, and so you get that sort of acceleration or deceleration or trying to go around the bend, but also some areas where it's quite clear that the lines are nearer to the surface. So I think it's focusing on those hotspots that would be very welcome.
That's right. That's why a blanket response to the entire line is, we can do better than that. And it's about bespoke responses to particular parts of the line that can hopefully ameliorate some of the concerns that you're alluding to.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'll continue to work with Deputy Mayor Shawcross on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just say to Assemblymember Berry, you've got 4 seconds on the clock.
Mr Chair.
Oh, sorry, you're well.
I'm done.
No, and I was just going to say that you well, you owe me 4 seconds, let's remember that. No, I was just mindful that I thought that your question here had been answered by the Mayor previously or been touched on. So that's fine, thank you. Okay, Assemblymember Sahota, Thrive London.
Thank you for your question, Anka. On 4th of July, I visited Tough FC to launch Thrive London. Tough FC is a football-based education project designed to support youth integration and improve the mental well-being of young people by bringing together children of different faiths and backgrounds to prevent young people from developing poor mental health. Brilliant initiative, I had a great time. The Thrive London report we published last month has been enthusiastically received, and the summer campaign has got off to an incredible start. Over 2,000 people took part in Thrive London engagement activity during July, with events in most boroughs, and over 15,000 people have actively engaged with online Thrive London material. Londoners from all walks of life are taking part and sharing their ideas on how we can meet London's mental health aspirations. The activity over summer is helping to build a movement for change, as well as informing the actions that we will take to make London a happier, healthier place. I'm struck by the real hunger there is to improve the mental health of the city. Through the TfL poster campaign, almost 18% of Londoners will have seen the posters, which will raise a profile and awareness of mental health issues. And once the summer campaign is complete, and we've listened to what Londoners tell us, we'll make sure that we act on this. And as you know from the excellent work that you and the Health Committee have done in investigating mental health inequalities experienced by different marginalised groups, whilst mental health affects everyone, it's both a cause and consequence of inequality, and is worse amongst specific groups. And our health inequality strategy, which will issue for consultation soon, will set up proposals for how we address health inequalities. Crucially, as you've mentioned, a rigorous evaluation framework is required to measure the impact that Thrive London is having. Conversations are in train on how we can do this and how we can learn from other citywide initiatives. However, this can't be developed until the engagement activity has been completed and analysed, and Thrive London partners lay out a plan of action later in the year.
Well, Mr Mayor, thank you very much for that very comprehensive response. And also to thank you and congratulate you for you raising the profile of mental health, which has been a Cinderella service in the NHS, and also where people don't think of mental health in the same terms as the thing of physical health. So I think you've given a good start in your mayoralty in raising these issues about this, and you need to be congratulated on that. But also, I very much welcome you now in the TfL space to be used to raise this profile. Could this become a permanent feature that we can use the TfL advertising space for public health campaigns, not only related to Thrive London, but other campaigns in the coming years?
I mean, the reason why I smirk for answer is because there's a balance to be struck. The phrase I used during the campaign was TfL is good but flabby. I was referring to TfL, not the previous mayor. Yeah. And what I was trying to do was trying to increase revenue streams of TfL, and advertising is an important revenue stream. So there's a balance to be struck between maximising revenue streams for TfL via advertising and posters, but also the public health role and education role that we can use the advertising and hoardings for. So we're balancing those competing interests, but you're right. If we can use our media outlets to, inverted commas, educate the public, inform them of big issues, we should do so.
Great. And how do you think that Thrive London will be fitting into the health inequality strategy that you'll be producing later on this year? Well,
first and foremost, what I don't want is for mental health to be just part of a health inequality strategy. I want it to be mainstream, affects everybody. So we've got to make sure our response takes everybody. And I'll give you one example. I myself, as well as deputy mayors, will be taking part in a mental health first aid training this month to improve mental health awareness. So none of us are immune to mental ill health. All of us have mental health. We want it to be mental good health. There's an economic case for us addressing the issues of mental ill health. There's a case in relation to access to public transport facilities. There's an issue in relation to addressing the fact that not all Londoners fulfil their potential. So the health inequality strategy is part and parcel of this vision we have of it being all-encompassing, the issue of good public health, particularly around mental health. And so I don't want you to think that the limit of my ambition is the health inequality strategies, but it'll be a big part of that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, thank you very much for taking forward some of the suggestions put forward by the Health Committee. Thank you.
Member Arnold, FGM.
Thank you, Deputy Chair, for this question from the Chair. FGM and all harmful practices are a stain on our city. We need to make clear that these criminal practices are unacceptable and will not be tolerated. I want to extend my thanks to you, Senator Arnold, for your continuing efforts to end FGM in London. Your passion and determination is a real asset in the fight to protect women and girls in the city from this profoundly harmful practice. Tackling violence against women and girls in London is one of the key priorities in my police and crime plan. And in recognition of the importance and breadth of this issue, I've committed to refreshing the London Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. My Office of Policing and Crime is imminently launching a consultation with key stakeholders, including the voluntary and community sector and survivors. I'd welcome the input and views of all Assembly members during that process, and my office will be in touch to arrange that. This consultation process is vital. Not only does it help to ensure that we produce a violence against women and girls strategy, which reflects the reality of the need in London, it also gives us an opportunity to galvanise a partnership response to what is one of the most important safety issues in our city. This partnership approach is absolutely essential to tackling violence against women and girls, dealing with specific issues, and also recognising that in many cases victims and survivors may experience multiple types of offending. To illustrate that point, evaluation findings from the harmful practices pilot led by MOPAC highlighted that nearly in half of the harmful practice cases that were supported by specialist providers during the pilot, there were additional safety concerns identified. And can I end by saying this? I want to assure you that FGM and other harmful practices will be a vital part of the forthcoming London Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and we'll be considering not only the issue itself, but also how it intersects with other forms of violence against women and girls.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, can I just start by saying, Mayor, I have no doubt about your commitment to working towards a zero-cutting city. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I've been with you on the streets where you've given your commitment to do everything that you can. But it's just a couple of points. We're now seeing the whole area of harmful practice increase. I mean, some of the most I mean, just so unacceptable things that you can think of are happening in terms of violence against women and young people. And so one of my concerns is that if you put FGM in with that, then what you're then going to do is move the emphasis away from FGM, which as a standalone harmful practice, the figures when you look at them are just totally unacceptable. So that's one of my concerns. So not about your commitment, but in terms of officers around this area and having to make choices. And I'm not saying that the other practices are not important. I'm just saying that when you look at what the evidence that we have gathered for a number of years now about FGM, that it deserves a standalone actions and targeted. And why I say targeted, are you aware, Mr. Mayor, that 50% of all the newly recorded FGM crimes in England took place in London? Now, when you go out and speak to activists and survivors who are working in their communities, they are saying this is not about taking children abroad. These children are being mutilated here in our city. Now, in 2007, when I raised this and other activists raised this, the MPS thought their numbers then was of such great concern that they issued a £20,000 reward for any information leading to a successful prosecution. Given the numbers that we have here, where we have 2,560 newly recorded cases, 7 a day for FGM in 16-17 across London, will you explore with the MPS the possibility of reintroducing this reward?
I'm happy to, through you, Deputy Chair, I'm happy to look at measures we can do to address this issue. I mean, as you know, the reason in the past why I say female genital mutilation rather than FGM is because I think FGM doesn't do justice to how appalling this cutting is. It's female genital mutilation. You'll have seen the analysis of the work done in the 5 pilot boroughs. And so I'm happy to look into your suggestion about whether that may be, I don't want to use the word incentive because it's...
Signal.
Yes, a signal about how seriously we take this, but also we've got to understand that actually we've got to encourage people to report this, and we can't just point the finger at the CPS or the police. We've got to change the culture around here and stuff, so I'm happy to look into that. Can I also just say this because I was aware of the 50% figure. So 50% of female genital mutilation cases in the country take place in London.
Yes.
So we need a targeted approach in those areas. And so one of the things that we've done is, one of the things I've done is authorised additional victims funding to support and build on the training element of the harmful practices pilot, so that frontline workers are aware of this. Because the question, are we missing this? Because I talked about the intersection. So can I look into that and then come back to you about your suggestion about reintroducing the incentives because of the signal it will send?
Thank you. Oh, it's ongoing. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Hall.
Mr. Mayor, I completely agree with Assembly Member Arnold on this one. I really think it should be a standalone policy, because you go back years and years, and the work our colleagues have done have been incredible on this. It really needs more emphasis. 50% in London is nothing short of shocking. And this is a specific issue that has got to be dealt with. You often talk about marathons, not sprints. Well, I would suggest we need now a sprint on this, because as far as I can see, nobody has been convicted, and yet there's all these offences being caused. Will you please look again, as suggested by Assemblymember Arnold, to look at this as a standalone issue and get some answers that we can then deal with this completely cross-party. It's an absolute outrage that this still goes on in this country, let alone 50% of it in this country, in London.
Well, Deputy Chairman, through you, one of the reasons why our police and crime plan places such a huge significance on addressing the issue of violence against women and girls is because for too long the issue of violence against women and girls has been neglected, and that is an outrage. And that's why, rather than having a set of 7 targets for MOPAC, which were crude and led to the HMIC report into children, girls in London being let down, we've moved away from a crude MOPAC 7 model to a policing crime plan that has at its core how we help vulnerable Londoners, particularly women and girls. I accept the point that Senator Arnold's made to me outside of this chamber about her concern about female genital mutilation being lost. I'm being careful with my language, being lost in the issue of addressing the issue of violence against women and girls, and it's a serious and legitimate concern that she has. And I looked, when we had the conversation, I looked at this particular issue about your concern. And the reason why I'm keen to make sure that we have, as part of the package of dealing with the issue of violence against women and girls, the issue of tackling female genital mutilation as part of that is because of the intersection of grievances and crimes victims suffer. So a victim of female genital mutilation may also be a victim of other forms of crime. Similarly, victims of other forms of crimes may also be the victim of female genital mutilation. So I'm not in any way minimising how serious this issue is. I'll give you one example from the work we did with one of the groups. So IMCAN, and I know you know IMCAN very well. IMCAN is a UK-based black feminist organisation. They've highlighted that harmful practices are a form of violence against women and girls and a violation of women's human rights. But their work also looked at the female genital mutilation data from one hospital over the course of a week. And this found that survivors of female genital mutilation were experiencing a range of violence, including sexual exploitation, domestic violence, honour-based violence, honour-based abuse. And that's why I listen to the experts, and again, I'll listen to you as well in relation to your expertise and stuff, so nothing's closed here. I'm willing to look at wherever we can to address this pernicious, evil act that takes place still in 2017.
Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, there were 6,000 new cases of FGM last year. Half of those are likely to be in London. Why isn't there anybody in jail?
Well, you'll be aware from...
Will you ask that question of the police? Why is there nobody in jail for this abuse? And can you assure me, will you also ask the police, Mr Mayor, that we aren't being asked to observe cultural sensitivities in order to pursue this crime?
Sure. I mean, that's a question that's been asked in a different way to the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, because they have been working on this for the last few years as well, as indeed as the DPP, the previous Commissioner and the current Commissioner. You'll be aware, Mr Boff, there was one charge and prosecution that was ultimately unsuccessful. But you're right, it just beggars belief there's been no successful... There's still, by the way, there's still, as we stand, no successful prosecution. The evidence I have is, I'm not sure if the police are being sensitive towards cultural sensitivities, but I'm meeting the Commissioner today. I'll check that isn't the case. I'm sure it isn't the case. If the police were here, I'm sure they would say they rely upon information given to them by members of the public. And that's why the work that Senator Arnold's been doing over years to educate members of the community is so important. Look, this is a crime. This is mutilation, and there is no excuse or justification for this. And I share your anger. I don't want to point the finger just at the police, though. And so let me discuss it with the Commissioner and come back with a more considered response.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on then to next question from Assembly Member Copley. Accommodation needs of gypsies and travellers.
One of London's greatest strengths is its diversity. We need to make sure this is recognised and celebrated as we plan for the city of the future. We must use our policies to tackle inequalities and discrimination and to create a fairer city which all Londoners can participate in and enjoy. A vitally important element of creating a city for all Londoners is ensuring that all Londoners can access accommodation which is suitable for them and meets their needs, and this includes suitable accommodation for gypsies and travellers. I would like to acknowledge the important work Senator Member Copley has done and continues to do with the gypsy and traveller community in London. He has helped raise awareness of the issues and inequalities often faced by this group, including through their recent campaign, We Are So Many Things. Estimates show that there are around 30,000 gypsies and travellers in London, and I'm aware that there is much more to do to ensure that the accommodation needs of London's gypsies and travellers are planned for and met. My team here in City Hall have been working closely with the gypsy and traveller community to inform the development of policies in the forthcoming draft London Plan and the draft London Housing Strategy. Through my new draft London Plan, I'll be requiring London boroughs to accurately identify need for permanent gypsy and traveller pitches and to plan to meet this identified need. This will be based on a more comprehensive definition of gypsies and travellers to ensure the housing needs of this group are more accurately assessed. As my draft London Housing Strategy will set out, meeting this need should involve the development of permanent sites as well as improvements to and protections for existing capacity. I will work with gypsy and traveller communities and with councils to provide funding through my Affordable Homes programme for new sites and improvements for existing ones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As you will know, the government's redefinition in planning terms of what constitutes a gypsy and traveller has created a number of problems in terms of identifying need, and I think their decision to do that was the wrong decision. It's ended up with some boroughs coming back with an assessed need of 0, including London Borough of Newham, where, despite the fact that they'd lost a traveller pitch as part of the Olympic Park development. I was interested to hear what you said about, in your London plan, ensuring that there is a different definition. Does that mean that going forward, boroughs, when they are making their assessment of need, under your plan, will not be using the government's more restrictive definition of need?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
That is very, very welcome. But in the course of drawing up your current plan, some boroughs have already taken an assessment of need. Will you be requiring boroughs to undertake a new assessment of need as part of your London plan process?
So, I mean, the issue you raise about things boroughs are doing in advance of my draft London plan is an issue that affects not just gypsy and travellers but other issues as well.
Yes, of course.
And we've got to be a bit careful about retrospective changes. So the short answer is the draft London plan will be very different from current definition and will have a comprehensive definition for gypsies and travellers for boroughs to use when assessing need than is currently set out in the National Planning Guidance. My Deputy Mayor, James Murray, has alerted councils to this, so they can't plead ignorance when it comes to changes they bring in when they know now it's been telegraphed what my intention is. And the reason why James Murray is telegraphing this is so if we do suggest to councils changes they've got to make as a consequence of a draft London plan, they can't plead ignorance.
That's very welcome to hear. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. But of course, it's not as well. It's very welcome that there'll be a significant change in terms of the London plan, but we also need to make sure that we need to look at delivery as well through your London plan and through your housing strategy. How will you be working with other members of the GLA group, local authorities, housing associations and developers to find innovative solutions through your strategy, through your London plan, to ensure real and measurable increases in gypsy and traveller site provision?
One thing we can do, which will make a tangible difference, I hope, is to provide funding through the Affordable Homes programme for new sites and improvements to existing ones. And I'm hoping that will not only send a signal to the GLA family and the wider providers, but also be of tangible assistance. But one of the things that the Mayor does is, and I do this all the time, is to say to the functional bodies, whether it's TfL, the Met Police, London Fire Brigade, and others, is that we've got to have continuity of policy in all the various areas we do, whatever part of the functional bodies it is. But it's much more than that. Our ambition should be much more than that as well. And so I'm hoping a combination of the draft London plan, the availability of additional funding, but also the message that I, as the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for Housing, James Murray, sends is one that people take on board.
And I think it will take some leadership because, of course, the previous Mayor had a fund for pitches, which was undersubscribed, and we've not actually seen in recent years any new gypsy and traveller pitches being created. We've only seen funding for bids for funding for expansion. Just finally, though, can I ask you this? Boroughs have drawn attention to the need for a pan-London approach for things like temporary stopping sites to try and help combat the problems of costly illegal encampments, as well as supporting the gypsy and traveller communities and maintaining their traditional way of life. Would you, your deputy mayors for planning and for social inclusion meet with myself and borough representatives and the London Gypsy and Traveller unit to discuss this further?
Happy to, very happy to.
Thank you very much.
Right. Most welcome question, Assemblymember Copley. The next question is from Assemblymember Dismal, funding for schools.
I'm disappointed that ministers continue to ignore our advice and the high concerns of so many schools, boroughs and parents in London. On the face of it, £1.3 billion extra added to the core education budget over 2 years may sound like good news, but actually it's not new money and will come from existing education budgets. We are still waiting for the full details, of course. While Justin Greening, the Secretary of State, talked of this money providing a 0.5% a year per pupil cash increase for every school, 0.5%, it is for just 2 years, and the National Audit Office have said that schools can expect an 8% increase in costs by 1920, 0.5% versus 8%. As well as £315 million of this announced money is also going to be diverted from the sugar tax next year. This leaves just £100 million to fund the original child health objectives. Now, I've said many times that the government's proposed changes to the national funding formula will result in an education crisis in London. Schools in every single one of the capitals, 33 local authorities, will lose funding and London pupils will lose out. The implications are severe when combined with other budget pressures. We could lose teachers, standards risk dropping dramatically, special education units will be impacted, school days could be shorter, extracurricular activities could become a thing of the past, and pupils will suffer. It's a little surprise that London Council's recent survey with 400 London school teachers found 71% of head teachers think that future funding reductions will negatively impact on children's outcomes, and 47% of secondary school head teachers in London have already reduced the breadth of their curriculum to deal with funding cuts. Let me end with this. I'll continue to work together with London councils and others to fight for a fairly funded school system that will work for young Londoners for generations to come.
Well, thank you for that reply, which, as you say, is a very disappointing approach from the government. Their latest scheme will cut the funding to 70% of London's schools, and out of the top 10 areas in the country that lose out under the new national funding formula, 8 are London boroughs, including Camden in my constituency, which stands to lose about £8 million. And as the National Audit Office report identified, schools can expect an 8% increase in their running costs by 2019-20. So would you agree that the Conservative government is in utter disarray after their sorry list of U-turns by attempting to plug the gaps in school funding with no new money instead of providing adequate funding levels? What action can you take to try and prevent London school children losing out on a good standard of education?
So I'll be announcing later on this year a new Schools for Success scheme we're setting up to help schools in London. But I've got to be frank in relation to this. I mean, when you speak to head teachers across London, 65% of them, 65% of schools in London are planning to reduce the number of teachers in their schools in coming years. So that's the backdrop against which we're working, and you've got to, I know you recognise this, Senator Dismal, but we have no statutory role in relation to schooling in London, but I think the government's got to recognise that we as a city need a pipeline of talented people having their potential fulfilled, and if schools are underfunded, we'll revert to the days before the early noughties, where the schools in London, rather than being the best in the country that they are now, were, I'm afraid, schools that were the most underperforming in the country.
One of the Conservatives' biggest cuts, 88%, is to their own flagship free school programme. Do you agree that this will inevitably impact on pupil numbers if free schools are cut back in other schools, with consequent further funding pressures on those schools?
Well, the only way it's viable to open a new school is via it being a free school. That's because of the government changes over the last 7 years. So even though many have concerns about free schools, the reality is you've got to be pragmatic and go along with it, because it's the only way to get new schools open, which is important, bearing in mind there is a shortage of school places in London. Many schools across London are trying to expand classrooms on the same footprint they've got, which is leading to reverting back to a position we had pre-97 of most classes being above 30 pupils and stuff, which is not conducive good learning and stuff. And, you know, I really do worry about the future generations of Londoners being schooled in London, bearing in mind the funding crisis that we've got, and the cuts the government's making to funding in London are going to have huge problems. Of course, I welcome the other U-turn they did, which is no more grammar schools, but actually that was always going to be a distraction from the real issue of improving all the schools.
Well, the DfE has explicitly admitted that the main group of schools likely to see reductions were, quote, those in inner London and some other urban areas that have particularly benefited from historic funding decisions. And research by the National Union of Teachers and Child Poverty Action Group show that while over 40% of pupils are eligible for free school meals, those schools are the ones that are going to lose out most. So what do you think that says about the government's priorities and the Conservative Party's priorities for education?
Well, it's just, I mean, one of the things I said in my answer to your first question was the statement of a fact, which is schools in every single one of the capital's 33 London authorities will lose funding and London pupils will lose out. But it's also a fact that actually in the London schools that have benefited most from the changes that we brought in when you were a Member of Parliament in the early noughties, post-1997, the progress will be lost. And it shows, it doesn't simply show the government letting down the most vulnerable children, but it shows a lack of investment in children, which is crucial at a time when, as Assembly Member Sohoto said in an answer to the previous question, our European, cousins are leaving London because of Brexit, at a time where the government's placing hurdles on talented people to come to our city. You've also got a situation where youngsters in our city aren't being trained up, aren't having the potential fulfilled to fill the skills gaps that inevitably will be, and that's why it's crucial for the government to do a reversal of this policy of not investing in young people in London.
Okay, final question, last 5 minutes. Assembly Member Duval, school places.
No, Chair, I've got a follow-up question to Andrew Dismore first before I go on to my formal question. In terms of following up that conversation, Mr Mayor, I think you're right to point out you've had no statutory role, but actually in the last year you've done quite a lot, not just in terms of reorganising the portfolio of your Deputy Mayor, but in terms of speaking out for issues and also doing some small contributions in terms of supporting schools. I too share your worries and concerns about the future, as well as as you said, rightly so, some of the distractions. So we've got real problems coming up here of, on top of the funding formula, school places, an academisation process that concentrates more about cheaper teachers rather than what takes place in the classroom, changes to the banding system that, quite frankly, is going to have a major outcome in terms of those opportunities for young people in the future. And then there's this issue for this sector that seems to mix messages coming on top of what we want it to achieve or not achieve, of losing that. Do so if you're doing those activities, would you consider of bringing together those professional practitioners to come together to sort out the London agenda and to avoid some of the worst aspects that can occur to the education system of London? This isn't a power grab. I'd expect you to be working, as you rightly said, with London councils, because rightly it's placed with a responsibility on local authorities. But there's just such a need for that, extending that champion role, honest broker role, which only you can do, pan-London, it seems to me. Would you consider doing that? And at the same time, how do we have a conversation with Londoners, because I think there is an appetite out there to talk about some of those education opportunities and to bring them together for a bigger gathering that we may have considered in the past. But could look at that in terms of your work programmes and to see would that be appropriate?
No, thank you, Senator Duval. You're right, we're doing a lot of work in education, from the London Curriculum, London Ambitions, which supports schools and businesses, Healthy Schools London, Team London Young Ambassadors, the work around air quality. We had a fantastic conference here in City Hall, organised by my Deputy Mayor, Joanne McCartney, where we brought together some of the people you're talking about. Great conference. And we're doing a lot more of that convening role, Len, which is crucial. And just to give credit to MPs from all parties, Bob Neal and Steve Reid chair very well the London group of MPs who've been really good allies of London in relation to lobbying the government. London councils do a huge amount of work as well. Also businesses often complain, sometimes rightly so, about people not having the skills they need for the jobs that they are creating. They're frustrated as well about the lack of investment and short-sightedness from the government. So look, I take the challenge that you've set me, which is to, use the power of the mayor, the convening roles, to do even more in this area. And I'll tell you this, during the general election campaign, I was campaigning like you across London, and what was wonderful was parents coming together. I'm not making a political point, but parents coming together to lobby candidates from all parties, saying, look, we're concerned about the cuts our schools are facing. And these were parents not previously involved in electioneering or involved in lobbying candidates and doing so, because you're right. I think parents and those who care about education in London are really concerned about some of the progress made, hard fought, being lost in weeks, months and years to come. And so I take the challenge as the mayor to address this issue and use my convening power to do even more than we're currently doing.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Deval, for your question. Providing a good school place for every London child is an essential part of making London a great place to live and to bring up your family. London boroughs have done a fantastic job so far expanding primary and secondary schools to meet demand. I'm pleased that Justine Greening announced in July that some new schools will be developed through the local authority route. New schools should be planned with the local authority. However, I am concerned that London boroughs will find it increasingly difficult to deliver the new secondary schools that the city needs. This is the most pressing problem, as approximately 105,000 extra secondary school places will be needed by 2025. Growth of the city creates demands on the available land. Schools are part of the city's social infrastructure, and this is a key part of the London plan. Bold and positive measures must be sought so that London can accommodate new schools in mixed developments in a way that enhances neighbourhoods and supports communities. The government's free schools policy means that there are two parallel systems funding for school places. One system is the London Borough, providing for schools where there is a growth in pupil numbers. Running alongside this and funded centrally by the government is the free school system, with no published information on expenditure and costs. The current system is overly complicated and creates competition for land, driving up the costs of new school. I'm calling on all stakeholders involved, boroughs, the DOV, the Education and Skills Fund Agency, local ed, regional schools commissioners, London councils and the developer community to work more closely. A far greater level of transparency is needed to ensure that together we plan for new schools with the new developments and other available land, ensuring that school designs are of the standard we would want for London's pupils.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's quite clear, when in your answer you talked about a parallel system, and that transparency not associated with these parallel systems is causing a problem. When borough leaders can't tell you what's going on in their borough, and because of the role of the new regional schools commissioners haven't shared it with them, it just seems nonsense. And I'd like you to continue to support those borough leaders of whatever party to be able to get to the bottom of what's going on in their borough and what's the plans. But more importantly, I do think, and I think our education panel has had difficulties in getting the regional commissioners to attend, is start to question the role of three. And does that not stop pan-London planning and the degree of that cross-borough activity going on in school places that needs to actually, to just be challenged? Boris Johnson in his last administration came out against the three and said there should be one for London. Is that your view in terms of the evidence you've had so far, in terms of the conversations that you've had?
No, I agree with Boris Johnson. There should be one regional schools commissioner for London, and I've made the case for a single regional schools commissioner for London, as to give Boris credit, as you've done, as Boris did. Strategic oversight for London is essential to galvanise the creation of new places, as we discussed, secure the pool of great new teachers and improve schools. And one thing we've not discussed yet, which is worth us recognising, is the difficulties schools have recruiting and retaining teachers in London. There's not simply a high vacancy rate in the NHS nursing profession. I was a governor of a primary school from 1994 until 2016. In recent years, we've had huge problems recruiting and retaining teachers, and I think we've got to recognise that actually the current model of three regional commissioners is not really working. And if we had one regional commissioner in charge of London, that'd make a big, big difference. And it's not a past political point, by the way. I think most people who understand London get it.
And could you alluded to earlier on in an earlier answer about the role of a cross-party approach, because it's not just a inner or outer London problem, it's going to be a London-wide problem. Can we try to get consensus to get to the government and say, well, actually, we want more transparency and because we want to be able to plan, rather than wait for the catastrophe to happen, rather than for someone to drop the ball, because that's where we're heading to, unless there is a challenge there. Will you lead that and ask the players that could be to say, come on, let's get to grips with this before it becomes even, you know, like I believe it's heading for a catastrophe, unless someone gets a real grip of the situation?
I think we're already at crisis levels. I mean, we need 105,000 new places by 2025. At a time when land is short, at a time when there's two parallel processes, and at a time where it's just an observation of a fact. The government is partial and biased towards free schools. When local authority leaders are pulling their hair out of all parties, because where you need a school, they're not being built there. They're being built in other parts of the borough where there's actually no need for a school and there's surplus school places. And so we've got to bring it together. And that's why I'm hoping, you know, I welcome the announcement from the Secretary of State to give local authorities a role now in relation to new school places. Actually, why do we need an alternative model anyway? And I'm hoping for a return to local democratic accountability and planning. Very important.
Thank you very much. I hope you can brief the Assembly in the future about how far you've succeeded in bringing these people together for what makes sense for the communities of London to have a better deal out of this. These are difficult times in any public sector circumstances, but the education sector, this is the one where we need to work hard at to make sure it doesn't fall over the edge.
Okay, thank you, Assembly Member Deval, and thank you, Mayor.
Pleasure.
And we didn't need to go into extended time. We went over about 5-10 minutes, but that was the question had started before. And we took UKIP's time. so thank you very much for those really full answers from you. And we do hope that you'll be able to have some holiday break in August.
Me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, don't anybody move. We have to stay correct. Let's go to quickly action taken by the Chair under delegated authority. Can I ask the Assembly to note? Do you note? Yep, thank you. Then can I ask the Assembly to agree the recommendations are set out? I just have to put them into record, but that so that you all know. The Assembly under Section 61 of the GLA Act requires the attendance of Sir Peter Hendy, CBE, Chair of the London Legacy Development Corporation, and David Goldstone, CBE, Chief Exec of the London Legacy Development Corporation at the 2nd November meeting. And that notice will be given in accordance with Section 62 of the GLA Act 1999 in due course to answer questions in relation to the policies and work of the London Legacy Development Corporation. Thank you. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the London Assembly plenary, which will take place 10 a.m. on Thursday, 7th September 2013. There is no other business that I consider urgent, and I then wish you all a nice break, holidays and all that sort of stuff. See you in September.
GLA